In the mountain town of Crestwood, the tale of two sisters, Elena and Isabel Morrison, unravels, a story woven with affection, rivalry, and unresolved tensions. Elena, the elder, was the embodiment of virtue, compassionate, accomplished, and married to Nathan Carter, a celebrated chef who owned a popular gourmet restaurant. Their union was admired throughout Crestwood, epitomizing an idyllic love story. Elena and Isabel were raised in a modest home. Their parents were local artisans known for their craftsmanship. From a young age, it was evident that the sisters were distinctly different. Elena was always composed and courteous, earning the pride of her parents. She excelled academically and was well-liked throughout Crestwood. It seemed destined that she would lead a significant life, settle down, and start a family. Isabel, in contrast, was vibrant and often unpredictable. Equally intelligent, she was recognized for her adventurous spirit and occasional defiance. As they matured, their paths diverged further. Elena pursued a career in education, while Isabel experimented with various occupations but never settled on one. When Isabel returned to Crestwood, her charismatic influence was more noticeable than ever. She had a knack for navigating out of tricky situations and often used her charm to achieve her desires. Her romantic endeavors were intense yet fleeting. She thrived on the initial thrill but quickly grew restless, leaving a trail of wounded hearts, which only enhanced her reputation as the unpredictable sister. After completing her studies, Elena returned to Crestwood and immediately caught the attention of Nathan Carter. He had come to Crestwood to launch his restaurant and was captivated by both the town's charm and Elena. Their romance blossomed swiftly, leading to a picturesque wedding celebrated by all. Nathan's venture flourished, and they settled into a charming home amidst the mountains. A seemingly perfect life, yet the facade of perfection occasionally cracked. Elena, always meeting others' expectations, began to yearn for more. She had shelved her dreams of travel and new experiences to support Nathan's culinary ambitions and their life in Crestwood. Nathan, while successful, sometimes felt the weight of his responsibilities and the constraints of their serene life. He adored Elena deeply, but occasionally felt stifled by the need to maintain an impeccable image. Into this complex dynamic, Isabel returned to Crestwood, claiming a desire to reconnect with her roots after years of city hopping. In truth, she was fleeing a broken relationship and mounting debts. Despite their differences, Elena welcomed Isabel with open arms, offering her sanctuary as she figured out her next steps. This gesture highlighted the enduring connection between the sisters, despite the divergent roads they had traveled. As Isabel settled into life at Nathan's gourmet restaurant in Crestwood, the dynamics among the three of them began to subtly yet significantly shift, setting the stage for a drama that would shake Crestwood to its core, forever altering their lives. Initially, Isabel's presence seemed to rejuvenate Nathan and Elena's relationship. Their evenings were filled with laughter and shared memories as the sisters reconnected, and Nathan played the role of the attentive husband and brother-in-law. However, as days turned into weeks, Isabel's true intentions began to surface. Her gaze lingered on Nathan a little too long. Her casual touches became more frequent and deliberate. She found reasons to be alone with him, asking for help with culinary techniques, seeking advice on photo shoots, or just catching him alone in the kitchen late at night after Elena had retired. Nathan, initially oblivious to Isabel's advances, found himself increasingly enchanted by her vibrant personality. Unlike Elena, who was steady and dependable, Isabel was spontaneous and exhilarating. She listened intently to his ideas for new dishes and restaurant expansions, asking insightful questions that made him feel truly appreciated. In those moments, Nathan felt a surge of excitement he hadn't experienced in years. Nathan was a man of integrity, dedicated to his wife and the life they had built. He tried to keep his distance from Isabel, finding reasons to immerse himself in his work or to take on extra culinary challenges that kept him away from home. But Isabel was persistent. She recognized the inner conflict in Nathan's eyes and saw it as an opportunity rather than a barrier. She began to weave a careful web of seduction, playing on his uncertainties and unfulfilled aspirations. One evening, while Elena was at a school board meeting, Isabel orchestrated what appeared to be an innocent dinner with Nathan. She prepared his favorite meal, opened a bottle of exquisite wine, and created an intimate setting that was hard to resist. As they talked deep into the night, Isabel skillfully steered the conversation towards Nathan's dreams and passions, areas where she knew Elena had not fully connected with him. Nathan felt a mix of flattery, desire, and overwhelming guilt. He stumbled over his words, trying to steer the conversation back to safer topics, but Isabel had already sensed her advantage. She leaned in closer, her hand brushing his. "Don't you ever wonder what it would be like to be truly understood? To be with someone who sees you for who you really are?" The tension in the room was palpable. Nathan knew he should leave, should end this precarious flirtation before it escalated, but he felt paralyzed, unable to detach from Isabel's allure. As Isabel kissed him passionately, Nathan's resistance crumbled. In that moment, the foundation of his marriage began to reveal cracks, setting off a chain of events that would lead to a profound tragedy. The weeks following that fateful night transformed into a whirlwind of clandestine encounters and escalating guilt for Nathan. What began as a momentary lapse evolved into a full-blown affair, with Nathan and Isabel devising clever ways to meet without Elena finding out. Their rendezvous ranged from brief encounters in the back rooms of the restaurant to well-orchestrated trips under the pretense of culinary research, far from the prying eyes of Crestwood. Isabel reveled in the thrill of their secret relationship, each meeting fueling her sense of triumph over her sister. For Nathan, the affair was a blend of excitement and self-reproach, leaving him exhilarated yet filled with remorse after each encounter. Isabel, adept in manipulation, knew precisely how to keep Nathan ensnared. She played the ideal companion, oscillating between being a passionate lover and a compassionate listener. She attended to his frustrations about his career and the aspirations he had yet to fulfill, providing the understanding and support he craved. "I've never met anyone like you, Nathan," she would whisper during their intimate moments. "You deserve so much more than this quiet life here." Her words were carefully crafted to instill seeds of discontent in Nathan's mind about his life with Elena. She conjured visions of a future brimming with excitement and freedom, free from the constraints of small-town expectations. Nathan found himself increasingly torn between his growing feelings for Isabel and his loyalty to Elena. The strain of leading a double life began to manifest in mood swings and unusual behavior that Elena could not ignore. At home, Nathan's guilt was evident through his alternating distance and excessive affection, as if trying to compensate for something. He immersed himself deeper into his culinary projects, taking on more initiatives than ever, using his restaurant as both a diversion and an alibi for his frequent absences. Isabel, for her part, maintained the facade of the attentive sister-in-law flawlessly. She would engage Elena in lengthy discussions, feigning interest in her day-to-day concerns while secretly reveling in her duplicity. Occasionally, a glimmer of guilt would cross Isabel's face, a brief recognition of the pain she was inflicting upon her sister. But these moments were fleeting and quickly suppressed by her desire for Nathan and her deep-seated ambition to outshine Elena. As their affair deepened, Nathan and Isabel began taking greater risks. They started meeting in more public spots around Crestwood, driven by their mutual attraction and becoming less cautious of the potential consequences. There were close calls. A restaurant patron nearly saw them together, and a local friend of Elena's spotted them at a cafe in a nearby village. Each brush with exposure only intensified their connection, making the risks seem like part of the excitement. But as the weeks turned into months, the stress of their secret started to take its toll. Nathan, who had once found the affair exhilarating, now felt perpetually tense. His guilt was overwhelming, affecting both his professional life and his personal relationships. He began to wonder if his feelings for Isabel were worth jeopardizing everything he had built with Elena. Isabel, sensing Nathan's inner conflict, intensified her efforts to keep him close. She demanded more of his time and became more vocal about her feeling. Her tactics grew more blatant, preying on his guilt and desires simultaneously. As the affair escalated to its peak, neither Nathan nor Isabel realized that their fragile web of lies was about to unravel. Meanwhile, Elena, unsuspecting at first, started noticing subtle changes. A strange new perfume on Nathan's clothes, secretive phone calls that ended abruptly when she entered the room, and a growing emotional distance that was hard to ignore. Ironically, it was Isabel who became Elena's confidant during this period, offering comfort and reassurances that only deepened the betrayal. As time passed, Elena could no longer dismiss the doubts creeping into her mind. She became more vigilant about the inconsistencies in Nathan's explanations about late nights at the restaurant and supposed supplier meetings. She noticed Isabel's lingering looks at Nathan, the barely hidden desire in her eyes. One day, while sorting laundry, Elena found a matchbook from a bed and breakfast in a neighboring village. An inn she knew was not on any of Nathan's travel routes. The discovery sent a cold shock through her, confirming her worst fears. Torn between confronting the truth and fearing what it might reveal, Elena became consumed with anxiety. She withdrew from her social circles, unable to discuss her suspicions without making them feel more real. Her nights were restless, filled with unsettling dreams, and she found herself observing Nathan and Isabel closely, looking for any clue that might confirm her suspicions. In a moment of desperation, Elena thought about hiring a private investigator, but decided against inviting strangers into their private affairs. Instead, she resolved to confront Nathan and Isabel individually, hoping to pressure one of them into confessing. Little did she know, this decision would trigger a chain of events that would lead to a confrontation more catastrophic than she could have imagined, permanently altering their lives. The day of reckoning arrived on a stormy late autumn afternoon. Elena had spent the morning steeling herself for this confrontation, rehearsing her words, determined to remain composed despite the impending heartbreak. When Nathan walked in, shaking rain from his coat, he was met by the sight of his wife standing in the room, her expression a mask of barely contained emotions. The tension was palpable, and he immediately sensed that their carefully maintained facade was about to crumble. "We need to talk," Elena began, her voice quivering slightly despite her best efforts. "I know about you and Isabel." Nathan's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled for words. In that quiet moment of shock, Elena saw the truth plainly written on his face, and her last shred of hope evaporated. "How long?" she demanded, her voice rising. "How long have you been seeing my sister?" Nathan's shoulders slumped in defeat, realizing there was no point in denying it any longer. "Elena, I'm so sorry. It just happened." Elena interrupted him with a bitter laugh. "You never meant to? What, did you just stumble into her bed? How could you do this?" Her pent-up anger and hurt burst forth, filling the house with her loud accusations and questions. Nathan could only stand there, absorbing her fury, his weak apologies doing nothing to stem the tide of her wrath. As their argument reached its peak, the front door opened and Isabel stepped in, stopping short at the explosive scene. For a moment, the three of them stood frozen, caught in a tableau of betrayal and guilt. "Isabel, how timely of you to join us. We were just discussing your affair with my husband." Isabel's eyes darted between Elena and Nathan, her mind scrambling for an exit. Nathan, caught between the two sisters, tried to intervene. "Please, let's just calm down and talk about this rationally." His plea only redirected Elena's fury. In a burst of anger, Elena grabbed a vase from the coffee table and hurled it across the room, narrowly missing Nathan. It shattered against the wall, punctuating her word. The noise seemed to jolt Isabel from her defiant stand. For the first time, a flicker of remorse crossed her face. Nathan and Isabel exchanged a look of helpless guilt before slowly making their way to the door. As it closed behind them, Elena collapsed onto the sofa, her body racked with sobs. The life she had cherished, the future she had envisioned, had crumbled in just a few moments. Outside, as the storm raged on, Elena's mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, shame, betrayal, and a deep sense of loss. In that moment, she made a decision that would set in motion the final tragic act of their saga. The bartender, Hank, a seasoned observer of the Crestwood locals, watched with concern as Elena downed one drink after another. He had seen many patrons drown their sorrows at Crestwood Tavern, but the wild look in Elena's eyes tonight was especially troubling. "Another," Elena slurred, her gaze intense. Hank hesitated, but the determination in her eyes compelled him to comply. He poured another whiskey, neat, silently hoping it would be her last for the evening. As the night progressed, the tavern emptied, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts and her drinks. The alcohol dulled the acute pain of betrayal, replacing it with a chilling resolve. Around midnight, Hank suggested it might be time for her to head home. "Need me to call you a cab, miss?" he asked. Elena waved him off, clumsily rummaging through her purse for her car keys. "I'm fine," she insisted. "I just need to get out of here." Hank tried to intervene, but Elena was already staggering toward the door. She managed to start her car in the deserted parking lot, its engine breaking the silence of the night. She drove off, her vision blurred and reactions sluggish, navigating the winding mountain roads that lay ahead. As she drove, Elena's mind was a whirl of emotions: anger at Nathan and Isabel's betrayal, shame for not having seen the signs sooner, fear of what lay ahead. Her speed increased as she took on the perilous curves of Mountain Pass. Then, Disaster struck. Her dulled reflexes couldn't handle a sharp turn. The tires screeched, and the car began to slide. In a moment of terrifying clarity, Elena realized her mistake, but it was too late. The guardrail gave way with a horrific noise, and suddenly her car was airborne, plummeting toward the rocky terrain below. At dawn, Officer Liam Murphy received a distressing call. A hiker had discovered a wrecked car at the base of Mountain Pass, a notoriously dangerous stretch. With a heavy heart, Murphy approached the scene, dreading what he might find. The car was a mangled mess, barely recognizable after the violent crash. As the rescue team worked to retrieve the vehicle, Murphy began the grim task of the investigation. The license plate, miraculously intact, identified the vehicle as belonging to Elena Morrison. Murphy's heart sank. He knew Elena well, as did everyone in Crestwood. The burden of delivering such news to her family was immense. As the morning unfolded and the extent of the tragedy became evident, whispers spread throughout the town. Elena Morrison, known for her sensibility and dedication, had died in what appeared to be a tragic accident caused by drunk driving, a stark contrast to the woman everyone thought they knew. Detective Sarah Watson, brought in from the nearby city to lead the investigation, immediately sensed discrepancies in the case. Her keen eye noticed details that seemed off. The absence of skid marks on the mountain road suggested no attempt to brake, the odd angle of the car's descent off the cliff, and the reports of Elena drinking alone, which her friends adamantly claimed was out of character. Upon arriving at the Carter residence to deliver the grim news, Watson felt the tension thick in the air. Nathan Carter's reaction to his wife's death was subdued and seemed tinged with guilt, while Isabel Morrison's presence in the house at such an early hour raised immediate red flags. In the days that followed, Detective Watson dove deep into the investigation, peeling back the tranquil facade of Crestwood to reveal the underlying tensions. Her first stop was the Crestwood Tavern, where she spoke with the bartender, Hank. Hank recounted Elena's state on the last night of her life, describing how she had been heavily drinking. She was knocking him back like there was no tomorrow, he confessed, his expression marked by regret. I tried to stop her from driving. This account starkly contrasted with the description of Elena by her friends and colleagues, who knew her as cautious and responsible, not one to recklessly drink and drive. Watson's suspicions deepened. Watson next focused her attention on Nathan and Isabel. Their behavior post-Elena's death was peculiar. Rather than mourning separately, they appeared to find comfort in each other's company, exchanging meaningful glances and ceasing conversations abruptly when others approached. A significant breakthrough came when Watson interviewed Elena's close friend, Olivia Chun. Initially reluctant to speak ill of the deceased or add to the family's grief, Olivia eventually opened up under Watson's empathetic questioning. Elena had confided in me just days before it happened, Olivia disclosed, her voice trembling. She suspected Nathan was having an affair with Isabel. This revelation cast the entire case in a new light, prompting Detective Watson to delve deeper into the relationships and secrets that might have led to the tragic events of that fateful night. This confession illuminated the entire case for Detective Watson. She wasted no time in verifying the details, delving into Nathan and Isabel's recent actions. Bank statements revealed suspicious transactions, hotel bookings, and costly gifts that coincided with Nathan's supposed supplier meetings. As evidence mounted, Watson summoned Nathan and Isabel for separate interrogation. Under her rigorous questioning, their concocted stories began to unravel. Isabel was the first to break. Yes, we were having an affair, she admitted, tears streaming down her face. Elena found out that night. We had a massive argument, the three of us, but I swear we didn't realize she had left the house afterward. Confronted with Isabel's admission, Nathan also confessed to the affair but vehemently denied any role in Elena's tragic death. We made a terrible mistake, he said, his voice heavy with regret. But I loved Elena. I would never have wanted this to happen. Watson believed their claims that they hadn't directly caused Elena's death, but she understood that their actions had set the catastrophic sequence of events in motion. Her report painted a clear picture. Elena, devastated by the betrayal, turned to alcohol for solace. Her decision to drive that night, though ultimately her own, was profoundly influenced by the emotional turmoil caused by Nathan and Isabel's deceit. Ultimately, no criminal charges were filed in relation to Elena's death, but in the court of public opinion, Nathan and Isabel were judged severely. The scandal of their affair spread throughout Crestwood, irreparably tarnishing their reputations and ensuring that the memory of Elena's demise would haunt them forever. As time passed, the acute pain of the incident began to fade, but its impact lingered in Crestwood. The town gradually returned to its serene exterior, but its inhabitants carried with them the knowledge that beneath the surface of their seemingly peaceful community, powerful emotions and hidden secrets could swirl with devastating consequences. The tragedy of Elena Morrison had indelibly altered the soul of Crestwood, marking its history and its people permanently. Amanda Everwood, with her chestnut hair and piercing blue eyes, was the epitome of elegance and creativity. Born into a family of artists, her childhood home was filled with the scent of oil paints and the sight of canvases in various stages of completion. Amanda had inherited her mother's talent and her father's determination, quickly making a name for herself as an exceptional landscape artist. Her works were known for their vibrant colors and the way they captured the soul of nature. Richard Everwood, in contrast, came from a lineage of lawyers. The Everwood family was renowned for their legal prowess, with generations serving as judges, attorneys, and legal scholars. Richard was no different. He excelled in law school, graduating top of his class, and quickly climbed the ranks at one of the most prestigious law firms in Belleville. His charm, good looks, and sharp mind made him a formidable attorney and a desirable husband. Amanda and Richard met during their sophomore year of college. It was a classic case of opposites. Attracting Amanda's free-spirited nature complemented Richard's structured and disciplined approach to life. They fell in love quickly, their relationship blossoming amidst late-night study sessions, gallery openings, and summer road trips. After graduating, they married in a lavish ceremony that was the talk of Belleville. They settled into a beautiful Victorian home that Amanda adored. She transformed it into a haven filled with art, music, and love. The house had a large garden where Amanda often painted, drawing inspiration from the vibrant flowers and the changing seasons. Richard, on the other hand, was dedicated to his work, often spending long hours at the office. They had a son, Ethan, who became the center of Amanda's world. Their life seemed perfect, at least on the surface. Amanda's days were filled with painting, volunteering at the local art center, and taking care of Ethan. Richard's career continued to flourish, and he was soon made partner at his firm. They attended glamorous parties and charity events, where they were often the center of attention. However, as the years went by, Amanda noticed subtle changes in Richard. He became more distant, often coming home late and leaving early in the morning. The once warm and affectionate man she married was now cold and preoccupied. Amanda tried to ignore these changes, attributing them to the stress of his demanding job. However, the gnawing suspicion in the back of her mind grew stronger with each passing day. Carla Monroe entered their lives when Richard hired her as his personal secretary. Carla was stunning, with her dark, cascading hair, sharp features, and an aura of confidence that turned heads wherever she went. She was efficient, intelligent, and seemed to understand Richard in a way that Amanda no longer could. It wasn't long before Amanda's suspicions turned towards Carla. One evening, Amanda decided to confront Richard. She prepared a candlelit dinner, hoping to reignite the spark in their relationship and to get him to open up. As they sat across from each other at the dining table, Amanda poured her heart out, expressing her concerns and fears. Richard listened, but dismissed her worries, attributing his behavior to the pressures of his job. He assured her that there was nothing to worry about, but Amanda wasn't convinced. Determined to uncover the truth, Amanda hired a private investigator named Mark Collins. Mark was a seasoned professional with a reputation for discretion and thoroughness. Over the next few weeks, he followed Richard and Carla, documenting their interactions. The evidence he gathered was damning. Late-night dinners, weekends away, and intimate encounters that left no room for doubt. Richard was having an affair with Carla. Amanda felt a mix of emotions, anger, betrayal, and a deep sadness. She couldn't understand how Richard could do this to their family. But amidst her turmoil, she also felt a strange sense of relief. At least now she knew the truth, and she could decide what to do next. Armed with the evidence, Amanda's initial devastation gave way to a steely resolve. She decided to confront Carla first, hoping to gather more information before dealing with Richard. Amanda arranged a meeting under the pretense of discussing a charity event that Richard's firm was sponsoring. Carla, unaware of Amanda's true intentions, agreed to meet at a chic downtown cafe. The cafe was a cozy, intimate space with soft lighting and plush seating. Amanda arrived early, choosing a secluded corner table where they could talk privately. Carla walked in a few minutes later, exuding confidence and poise. As she approached the table, Amanda felt a mixture of anger and curiosity. Carla greeted Amanda warmly and commented on how beautiful the cafe was. Amanda, hiding her true feelings, replied politely and steered the conversation towards Richard. She mentioned how Richard had been spending a lot of time at the office and asked how he was handling the workload. Carla responded that Richard was incredibly dedicated and that the cases he was working on required a lot of his time and attention. Amanda then leaned in and, in a low voice, told Carla that she knew about the affair. Carla's face paled, and she opened her mouth to speak, but Amanda stopped her, saying she wasn't there to accuse or blame her. Amanda just wanted to understand why it happened. Carla, with tears in her eyes, explained that it started a few years ago when Richard was going through a rough patch at work. They began spending more time together, and one thing led to another. As Carla spoke, Amanda felt a strange sense of empathy. She could see the pain in Carla's eyes, a reflection of her own turmoil. By the end of the conversation, they had formed an unexpected connection. Amanda was captivated by Carla's intelligence and charisma, while Carla found solace in Amanda's understanding and compassion. In the weeks that followed, Amanda and Carla continued to meet in secret. What had started as a confrontation evolved into a complex relationship. Their meetings became more frequent, and their bond deepened. One evening, Carla invited Amanda to her apartment, ostensibly to review some documents related to the charity event. The apartment was a stylish modern space, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of the city. As they sat on the couch, sipping wine and talking, the tension between them grew palpable. Carla set her glass down and looked into Amanda's eyes, saying that she had developed feelings for her. Amanda's heart raced. She had felt the same way, but had been too afraid to admit it. She confessed that she felt the same way. Their lips met in a passionate kiss, and that night, they crossed the line from emotional connection to physical intimacy. The affair was intense, a whirlwind of stolen moments and secret rendezvous. Amanda felt alive in a way she hadn't in years, but she was also plagued by guilt and fear. They would meet in secluded spots around the city, hidden corners of parks, out-of-the-way cafes, and Carla's apartment, where they felt free from the prying eyes of the world. Their conversations ranged from deep, philosophical discussions to light-hearted banter. They shared their hopes, dreams, and fears, forming a bond that went beyond physical attraction. However, Amanda was acutely aware of the precariousness of their situation. She knew that if Richard found out, the consequences would be dire. Despite this, she couldn't bring herself to end the affair. Carla had become an essential part of her life, filling a void that she hadn't realized existed. Richard's suspicions grew as he noticed Amanda's changed behavior. She was more distant, often lost in thought, and seemed to have a newfound sense of confidence. Richard's paranoia led him to install a hidden camera in Carla's apartment, suspecting that Amanda might have discovered his affair and was plotting against him. When Richard reviewed the footage and saw his wife with Carla, his rage and sense of betrayal reached a boiling point. He felt emasculated and humiliated, convinced that both women had conspired against him. Richard began to meticulously plan his revenge, determined to regain control over his life. One stormy night, Richard invited Amanda to his office under the pretense of wanting to discuss their relationship and find a way forward. Amanda, hopeful for reconciliation, agreed. As she entered Richard's dimly lit office, she was struck by the coldness in his eyes. Richard told Amanda to sit down, his voice devoid of emotion. Amanda took a seat, her heart pounding. She started to speak, but Richard cut her off, slamming a folder of photographs on the desk. He said he knew everything and knew about her and Carla. Amanda's eyes widened in shock as she looked at the incriminating photos. She pleaded with Richard to let her explain, but he was beyond reason. He lunged at Amanda, his hands closing around her throat. Amanda struggled, clawing at his hands, but Richard's grip was unrelenting. Her vision darkened, and within moments she was gone. Richard stood over Amanda's lifeless body, his mind a whirlwind of rage and confusion. He knew he had to act quickly to cover his tracks. He staged the scene to make it look like a robbery gone wrong, ransacking the office and scattering papers everywhere. He then drove to Carla's apartment, his anger boiling over. Carla was startled to see Richard at her door. She asked what he was doing there, her voice trembling. Richard pushed past her, his eyes wild with fury. He accused her of ruining everything and seducing his wife, destroying his family. Carla backed away, fear gripping her heart, and begged Richard to listen to her and understand that it wasn't like that. But Richard was beyond listening. He lunged at Carla, but she managed to evade him, grabbing a heavy vase and smashing it over his head. Richard staggered, momentarily disoriented. Carla seized the opportunity and fled. Running into the night with nothing but the clothes on her back, she ran through the rain-soaked streets, her mind racing with fear and confusion. She had to get as far away from Richard as possible. She knew that if he caught her, he would kill her. Carla reached the outskirts of town and found an old abandoned cabin. She slipped inside, her body trembling with adrenaline and terror. The next morning, Ethan Everwood found himself without a mother and soon without a father. Richard, attempting to cover his tracks, reported Amanda missing and fabricated an alibi for himself. However, the police quickly uncovered inconsistencies in his story. Amanda's body was discovered in Richard's office, and forensic evidence, along with Richard's erratic behavior, pointed to his guilt. He was arrested and later convicted of Amanda's murder, sentenced to life in prison without parole. Carla, meanwhile, had vanished without a trace. Her car was found abandoned at a rest stop, miles away from Belleville. There were rumors that she had fled the country, but no concrete evidence ever emerged. Some speculated she had started a new life under an assumed identity. Carla's disappearance puzzled many. Growing up in a household marked by religious fervor and violence, Carla had endured years of suppression and fear. Fleeing wasn't just an escape, it was a lifeline to freedom. She feared the repercussions of being discovered by her family, knowing all too well the horrors they could unleash upon her, driving her to vanish without a trace, leaving behind a life of oppression for one of uncertain liberty. Ethan, now orphaned, was taken in by Amanda's sister Lydia, who raised him with love and care. The Everwood home, once filled with laughter and love, stood silent, a stark reminder of the tragic events that had unfolded. Lydia did her best to create a stable environment for Ethan, but the shadow of his parents' tragedy loomed large over his childhood. She often wondered what kind of man Ethan would grow up to be, carrying the weight of such a dark legacy. Carla's escape was not without difficulty. She knew she had to leave Belleville and disappear completely. She had some cash saved up and used it to buy a bus ticket to the nearest big city. From there, she moved from place to place, using different names and taking on various odd jobs to survive. Her once confident and poised demeanor was replaced by constant anxiety and fear of being recognized. Carla found temporary solace in small towns, where she could blend into the background. She dyed her hair, changed her appearance, and avoided making close connections with anyone. Each time she felt someone might recognize her, she moved on. Her life became a series of temporary stays and fleeting moments of peace. She missed Amanda deeply, and often dreamed about their time together, the passion they shared and the plans they had made. In a small coastal town far from Belleville, Carla finally found a semblance of stability. She took on a job at a local diner, working long hours and keeping to herself. The town was quiet, and the people were friendly but respectful of her privacy. For the first time in months, Carla began to relax and let her guard down a little. She rented a small, modest apartment and tried to rebuild her life, though the fear of being discovered never entirely left her. Ethan, now a teenager, struggled with the burden of his family's dark history. He was a quiet, introspective boy, often lost in thought. Lydia did her best to provide a loving home, but Ethan couldn't escape the whispers and stares from those who knew about his parents. School was a challenge, with classmates either avoiding him or bullying him for his father's crime. Ethan found solace in books and spent hours at the local library, immersing himself in stories far removed from his reality. Lydia encouraged Ethan to pursue his interests, hoping to provide him with a positive outlet. He developed a passion for writing, pouring his emotions and experiences into his stories. His teachers noticed his talent and encouraged him to pursue a career in literature. Despite the darkness of his past, Ethan found hope in the future he could create for himself. One day, while browsing through old family photo albums, Ethan came across a photograph of his parents during happier times. They looked so in love, so full of life. He wondered how everything had gone so wrong. Determined to understand, Ethan began to dig deeper into his family's history. He read old newspaper articles, interviewed people who had known his parents, and pieced together the story of their lives. Ethan's investigation led him to discover the affair between his father and Carla. He was shocked and saddened by the betrayal, but he also felt a strange connection to Carla. He wondered what had happened to her after that fateful night. His search for answers led him to contact Mark Collins, the private investigator Amanda had hired. Mark, now retired, was hesitant to reopen old wounds but was moved by Ethan's determination. Mark shared with Ethan the details of his investigation, the evidence he had gathered, and the events that had transpired. Ethan learned about the confrontation between his mother and Carla, their subsequent affair, and the night his mother was murdered. Ethan felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a deep need for closure. Determined to find Carla, Ethan followed the trail she had left behind. He visited the places she had stayed, talked to people who had encountered her, and slowly pieced together her journey. The trail eventually led him to the small coastal town where Carla was now living. Carla was working her usual shift at the diner when Ethan walked in. She didn't recognize him at first, but as he approached her, she saw a familiar sadness in his eyes. Ethan introduced himself, explaining that he was Amanda and Richard's son. Carla was stunned and filled with a mixture of fear and hope. She invited Ethan to sit down, and they began to talk. Ethan told Carla about his life, his struggles, and his search for answers. Carla, in turn, shared her story, her escape, and her attempts to rebuild her life. They talked for hours, sharing their pain and their memories of Amanda. Carla revealed how deeply she had loved Amanda, and how the affair had been a source of both joy and torment. Ethan asked Carla about the night his mother was murdered. Carla recounted the events, her voice trembling with emotion. She told him how Richard had confronted her, his rage and violence, and her desperate escape. Ethan listened intently, feeling a mix of anger towards his father and compassion for Carla. Ethan decided to stay in the coastal town for a while, to get to know Carla better, and to find some closure for himself. They spent a lot of time together, talking about Amanda, sharing stories, and helping each other heal. Carla found comfort in Ethan's presence, and Ethan felt a sense of connection and understanding that he had never felt before. As time went on, Ethan and Carla's relationship grew stronger. They became a support system for each other, helping to heal the wounds of the past. Ethan continued to write, inspired by the stories Carla had shared and the strength he saw in her. Carla found a new sense of purpose, helping Ethan and finding a way to move forward with her life. Years passed, and Ethan published his first novel, a fictionalized account of his family's story. The book received critical acclaim, and Ethan was praised for his emotional depth and storytelling ability. He dedicated the book to his mother, Amanda, and to Carla, who had shown him the importance of understanding and forgiveness. Carla, meanwhile, continued to live in the coastal town, finding peace and stability. She stayed in touch with Ethan, visiting him often and watching him grow into a successful writer. She found solace in the fact that she had been able to help Ethan find closure and that they had both found a way to move forward. The Everwood murders became a notorious case in Belleville, a cautionary tale of deceit, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of hidden passions. Amanda's art gained a lot of fame, her landscapes now imbued with a haunting beauty that drew admirers from afar. Richard's name, once respected, became synonymous with tragedy and madness. Years later, the town still whispered about Carla Monroe, the enigmatic secretary who disappeared into the night. Her fate remained one of Belleville's greatest mysteries, a lingering shadow over the tragic tale of the Everwood family. Ethan grew up carrying the weight of his parents' legacy, determined to forge a different path and break free from the cycle of betrayal and violence. In the end, the story of the Everwood murders served as a stark reminder of the fragility of human relationships and the devastating consequences of secrets and lies. It was a tale that would be told for generations, a dark chapter in the history of Belleville that would never be forgotten. Ethan continued to write, his works often exploring themes of love, betrayal, and redemption. His novels resonated with readers, many of whom were unaware of the true story behind his words. Despite the darkness of his past, Ethan found a way to turn his pain into art, creating something beautiful from the ashes of his family's tragedy. In the end, The Everwood murders were more than just a crime. They were a story of love, loss, and the enduring power of forgiveness. The lives of those involved were forever changed, but they found a way to move forward, to find peace, and create something new from the ruins of their past. On the morning of September 15, 2019, the body of Sydney Watkins, a 35-year-old elementary school teacher, was discovered in her modest two-bedroom home. The scene was gruesome, with clear signs of a struggle and multiple stab wounds marring Sydney's body. As detectives combed through the evidence, a chilling story began to emerge, one of a divorce gone wrong, a custody battle spiraling out of control, and a father driven to the unthinkable. At the center of this tragedy was Zendaya Thornton, the 8-year-old daughter of Sydney Watkins and Mark Thornton. Zendaya, a bright and vivacious child, had become the unwitting prize in a tug-of-war between her parents. What started as a mutual decision to end an unhappy marriage had devolved into a bitter feud, with both parties fighting tooth and nail for primary custody of their only child. Mark Thornton was born on July 12, 1982, in Hartford, Connecticut, the only child of Robert and Linda Thornton. From an early age, Mark showed signs of a driven and competitive nature, excelling in both academics and sports. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly idyllic childhood lay a darker reality. Robert Thornton was a strict disciplinarian with a volatile temper, often subjecting young Mark to harsh punishments for minor infractions. Linda, though loving, was passive in the face of her husband's outbursts, leaving Mark to navigate a household where success was demanded and failure was met with anger. As Mark grew older, he internalized his father's perfectionist tendencies and explosive temper. He developed a persona of confidence and charm, but those close to him noted an underlying insecurity and a need for control. Sydney Watkins came from a starkly different background. Born on March 3, 1984, in New Haven, Connecticut, she was the youngest of 3 children in a close-knit, working-class family. Her father, James, was a carpenter, and her mother, Mary, worked part-time as a librarian. Despite their modest means, the Watkins household was filled with love, laughter, and a strong emphasis on education and community service. Growing up, Sydney was known for her kind heart and empathetic nature. She excelled in school, particularly in subjects related to literature and social studies. Her passion for helping others led her to pursue a degree in education at Southern Connecticut State University. Sydney's gentle demeanor and patience made her a natural with children. She volunteered at local youth centers throughout college, and upon graduation, secured a position as a second-grade teacher at an elementary school. Mark and Sydney's paths crossed in the summer of 2008 at a mutual friend's wedding. Mark, then a rising star at his law firm, was immediately drawn to Sydney's warmth and authenticity, qualities that stood in stark contrast to the cutthroat world he inhabited daily. Sydney, in turn, was charmed by Mark's confidence and ambition, seeing in him a drive that complemented her more laid-back nature. Their courtship was a whirlwind romance. Mark swept Sydney off her feet with grand gestures and lavish dates, while Sydney introduced Mark to the simple joys of home-cooked meals and quiet evenings spent in meaningful conversation. After a year of dating, Mark proposed during a surprise weekend getaway to Sydney's vineyard. Sydney, deeply in love and envisioning a future filled with happiness and stability, joyfully accepted. The couple wed in a lavish ceremony in the spring of 2010, with both sides of the family coming together to celebrate what everyone believed would be a long and happy union. The first few years of Mark and Sydney's marriage were, by all accounts, blissful. They purchased a charming home in Oak Ridge, settling into domestic life with enthusiasm. Mark's career continued to flourish, while Sydney found fulfillment in her teaching and in creating a warm, inviting home for the couple. However, as time passed, small cracks began to appear in their seemingly perfect facade. Mark's work hours grew longer, and his stress levels increased as he pursued partnership at his firm. Sydney, while supportive, began to feel neglected and lonely. On April 17, 2011, Zendaya Thornton was born, bringing a renewed sense of joy and purpose to Mark and Sydney's lives. Mark, initially apprehensive about fatherhood given his own complicated relationship with his father, found himself utterly devoted to his daughter. He would spend hours reading to her, playing with her, and planning for her future. As Zendaya approached school age, the differences between Mark and Sydney became more pronounced. These differences led to frequent arguments, with each parent believing they knew what was best for their daughter. By the time Zendaya was 6 years old, the strain on Mark and Sydney's marriage had reached a breaking point. The constant arguments, lack of emotional intimacy, and fundamental disagreements about parenting had eroded the love that once bound them together. The divorce proceedings began in January 2018, and what started as an amicable separation quickly turned contentious. Mark, feeling betrayed and fearing the loss of control over his family, hired Gregory Patel, a notoriously aggressive divorce attorney. Sydney, overwhelmed by the sudden hostility, turned to her college friend Rachel Goldstein, a family law attorney known for her compassionate approach. The legal battle that ensued was bitter and protracted. Mark contested every aspect of the divorce, from the division of assets to the custody arrangements. He accused Sydney of being an unfit mother, citing her lack of ambition and permissive parenting style as reasons why he should have primary custody of Zendaya. Sydney, in turn, presented evidence of Mark's controlling behavior and volatile temper, arguing that his parenting style was detrimental to Zendaya's emotional well-being. The proceedings dragged on for months, draining both parties financially and emotionally. After nearly a year of legal wrangling, the court finally issued its ruling in November 2018. Taking into account Zendaya's age, her established routine, and the testimonies of various experts, the judge awarded joint legal custody to both parents. However, Sydney was granted primary physical custody, with Mark receiving generous visitation rights, including every other weekend and one weeknight dinner. This arrangement, while seemingly fair, left Mark feeling defeated and resentful. He viewed the decision as a personal failure and a threat to his relationship with Zendaya. Unbeknownst to Sydney or the court, this custody ruling would set in motion a series of events that would lead to tragedy. In the months following the divorce settlement, Mark's behavior became increasingly erratic and hostile. He began to obsessively document every interaction with Sydney, looking for any perceived misstep or violation of the custody agreement. His communications with her, once civil if tense, devolved into a barrage of accusatory emails and text messages. Mark's visitations with Zendaya became a source of constant conflict. He would return her late, change plans at the last minute, or attempt to schedule extra time without consulting Sydney. During handovers, he would often make snide remarks about Sydney's parenting, or try to manipulate Zendaya into saying she wanted to spend more time with him. At work, Mark's performance began to suffer as he focused more and more on finding ways to regain control over his family situation. Colleagues noticed his shortened temper and distracted demeanor, with some expressing concern about his mental state. Mark's boss, noticing the decline in his work quality, suggested he take some time off to sort out his personal issues. This only served to fuel Mark's paranoia, convincing him that everyone was conspiring against him. Sydney, deeply concerned about the impact of Mark's behavior on Zendaya, did her best to shield their daughter from the growing tension. She maintained a calm demeanor during handovers, redirected Zendaya's attention when Mark made inappropriate comments, and tried to ensure that Zendaya's time with her father remained positive. Privately, Sydney sought advice from her attorney and Zendaya's pediatrician on how to handle the situation. She began keeping a detailed log of Mark's behavior, documenting late returns, inappropriate comments, and any signs of emotional distress in Zendaya following visits with her father. Sydney also enrolled Zendaya in play therapy sessions with child psychologist Dr. Lisa Martinez, hoping to provide Zendaya with a safe space to process her feelings about the divorce and her father's changing behavior. Despite her efforts to keep things amicable for Zendaya's sake, Sydney found herself increasingly fearful of Mark's unpredictable moods. She installed a security system in their home and informed Zendaya's school about the situation, requesting that they not release Zendaya to Mark outside of his designated pickup times. Sydney also reached out to her brother Michael, asking him to be present during handovers when possible, hoping that a witness might temper Mark's hostility. As the conflict between her parents escalated, Zendaya's sunny disposition began to dim. Once outgoing and confident, she became withdrawn at school, often sitting alone at lunch or refusing to participate in group activities. Her teacher noticed a decline in Zendaya's academic performance and an increase in anxiety-related behaviors, such as nail biting and hair twirling. At home with Sydney, Zendaya became clingy and prone to emotional outbursts. She would often wake up with nightmares, calling out for both her parents. Sydney would find her daughter in tears, confused and upset by the conflicting loyalties she felt. Zendaya's play therapy sessions revealed a child torn between love for both parents and a deep-seated fear of abandonment. In early August 2019, Mark filed a motion for modification of the custody agreement, seeking primary physical custody of Zendaya. His petition cited Sydney's alleged parental alienation and claimed that Zendaya was flourishing under his care while regressing when with her mother. Sydney, armed with documentation of Mark's erratic behavior and reports from Zendaya's therapist, filed a counter-motion requesting supervised visitation for Mark. The court scheduled a hearing for September 20th, giving both parties just over a month to prepare their cases. This impending legal showdown ratcheted up the tension between Mark and Sydney to unprecedented levels. Mark became obsessed with winning the case, viewing it as his last chance to assert control over his family. Sydney, meanwhile, grew increasingly anxious about the possibility of losing custody of Zendaya, fearing for her daughter's emotional well-being if placed primarily in Mark's care. As the hearing date approached, Mark's grip on reality began to slip. He stopped showing up to work, using all his time to build his case against Sydney. His apartment became a chaotic mess of legal documents, photos of Zendaya, and scribbled notes detailing perceived slights and conspiracy theories. Mark's few remaining friends tried to reach out, concerned by his disheveled appearance and rambling phone calls, but he pushed them away, accusing them of siding with Sydney. Mark's paranoia reached new heights. He became convinced that Sydney was poisoning Zendaya against him and that the entire legal system was corrupt. He started following Sydney and Zendaya, taking photos of their activities and interpreting innocent interactions as evidence of Sydney's unfitness as a mother. In his distorted thinking, Mark began to see himself as Zendaya's savior, the only one who could protect her from Sydney's harmful influence. During this time, Mark's interactions with Zendaya became increasingly disturbing. He would interrogate her about Sydney's activities, make disparaging comments about her mother, and fill her head with promises of a better life once he won custody. Zendaya, confused and frightened by her father's intensity, began to resist visits, clinging to Sydney and begging not to go with Mark. 3 days before the scheduled custody hearing, Mark reached his breaking point. After a particularly difficult handover where Zendaya cried and refused to go with him, Mark became convinced that Sydney had turned his daughter against him completely. In his delusional state, he concluded that the upcoming hearing was rigged, that he would never receive a fair judgment, and that Sydney would always find a way to keep Zendaya from him. It was at this moment, alone in his cluttered apartment surrounded by the detritus of his obsession, that Mark made the fateful decision to take matters into his own hands. In his twisted logic, he reasoned that the only way to ensure he would have custody of Zendaya was to eliminate Sydney from the equation entirely. With cold determination, Mark began to plan the unthinkable, the murder of his ex-wife. In the early hours of September 15, 2019, Mark set his plan into motion. He had spent the previous 2 days meticulously preparing, his legal mind perversely applied to the task of committing and concealing a murder. He chose a Sunday, knowing Sydney would be home alone while Zendaya was at a sleepover with her maternal grandparents. Mark packed a bag containing a hunting knife he had purchased with cash at a sporting goods store 2 towns over. He also included rope, duct tape, and cleaning supplies, having researched methods to eliminate evidence. To establish an alibi, Mark had set up his home computer to make online purchases and send emails throughout the night and morning. He had also left his cell phone at home, connected to the Wi-Fi to create a digital footprint, suggesting he never left his apartment. At 4:30 a.m., Mark left his apartment, careful to avoid security cameras and potential witnesses. He drove a rental car, paid for with a prepaid credit card, to a spot a few blocks from Sydney's house. From there, he proceeded on foot, his heart racing with a mix of fear and determination. Mark arrived at Sydney's house just before dawn. Using a copy of the house key he had secretly made during a previous visit, he silently entered. The house was quiet, with only the soft hum of the refrigerator breaking the silence. Mark crept up the stairs, the knife clutched tightly in his hand. He paused outside Sydney's bedroom. He pushed open the door to find Sydney still asleep. The sound roused her and she sat up, confusion quickly turning to terror as she recognized Mark's figure in the dim light. "Sydney, "What are you doing to my daughter?" Mark's voice was low and menacing. Sydney scrambled out of bed, her voice shaking as she tried to reason with him. But Mark was beyond reason. He lunged forward, grabbing Sydney's arm as she attempted to run past him. She fought back fiercely. They struggled, crashing into furniture and knocking items off shelves. Sydney managed to break free momentarily. Running towards the hallway, Mark pursued her, his face contorted with rage. In the hallway, he caught up to her, tackling her to the ground. Sydney continued to fight, scratching and kicking, leaving defensive wounds that would later become crucial evidence. In a frenzy of violence, Mark brought the knife down repeatedly. Sydney's screams were cut short as the blade found its mark, again and again. The hallway walls, once adorned with happy family photos, were now splattered with blood. As quickly as it had begun, it was over. Mark stood over Sydney's lifeless body, his rage giving way to shock as the reality of what he had done began to sink in. The knife slipped from his blood-soaked hands, clattering to the floor. He rushed to retrieve his bag of supplies, frantically trying to clean up the worst of the blood. In his haste and shock, Mark made critical mistakes. He missed several blood spatters, left partial fingerprints, and failed to notice that in the struggle, Sydney had managed to grab of his hair. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, Mark gathered his things and fled the scene, leaving behind a trail of evidence that would ultimately lead to his downfall. At 8:30 a.m., Karen Mitchell, Sydney's close friend and fellow teacher, arrived at the house. They had plans to carpool to a teachers' conference that morning. When Sydney didn't answer the door, Karen used the spare key she knew was hidden under a flower pot. The moment Karen stepped inside, she knew something was terribly wrong. The house was eerily quiet, and there was a faint coppery smell in the air. She called out. As she climbed the stairs, she noticed smears on the wall that made her heart race. Karen's scream pierced the quiet Sunday morning when she discovered Sydney's body in the upstairs hallway. Trembling, she fumbled for her phone and dialed 911. "I think my friend has been murdered," she sobbed to the operator. "Oh God, there's so much blood." Within minutes, the peaceful suburban street was transformed into a chaotic crime scene. Police cars and ambulances crowded the driveway, their lights flashing silently in the morning sun. Neighbors gathered on their lawns, watching in shock as police tape went up around Sydney's home. The nightmare had only just begun. Detective Lisa Hawkins of the police department took charge of the investigation. With 15 years of experience in homicide cases, she immediately recognized the signs of a crime of passion. The brutality of the attack, the lack of forced entry, and the personal nature of the crime all pointed to someone close to the victim. As the forensics team combed through the house, collecting blood samples, fingerprints, and other trace evidence, Detective Hawkins began interviewing neighbors and friends. Karen Mitchell's statement about Sydney's contentious relationship with her ex-husband quickly made Mark Thornton the primary suspect. The investigation moved rapidly. A search warrant was obtained for Mark's apartment, where detectives found a disturbing shrine to Zendaya and Sydney, walls covered with photos and legal documents. Mark's computer revealed his obsessive research into custody laws and, more damning, methods of committing untraceable murder. Meanwhile, the forensics team made crucial discoveries at the crime scene. Despite Mark's attempts to clean up, they found his DNA under Sydney's fingernails and matched the hair Sydney had grabbed to Mark's genetic profile. Partial fingerprints found in the house were also consistent with Mark's. As the evidence mounted, Detective Hawkins knew they needed to move quickly. Mark Thornton had become not just a suspect, but a potentially dangerous fugitive who might attempt to reach his daughter. Unaware that he was already the prime suspect, Mark attempted to establish his alibi. He returned to his apartment, showered, and meticulously cleaned his clothes and shoes. He then made several calls, including one to Sydney's phone, leaving a message asking about picking up Zendaya later that day. Mark then went to a local coffee shop, making sure to be seen by the staff and engaging in conversation with other patrons. He even called the police himself later that afternoon, expressing concern that he couldn't reach Sydney. However, Mark's careful planning began to unravel almost immediately. A neighbor had noticed the unfamiliar rental car parked near Sydney's house in the early morning hours. The car rental company confirmed that Mark had rented the vehicle using a prepaid card, a detail he had overlooked in his haste to remove the car from the scene. The trial of Mark Thornton began 6 months after Sydney's murder. The prosecution presented a compelling case built on both forensic evidence and a disturbing psychological profile of the defendant. Forensic experts testified about the DNA evidence found at the crime scene, including the hairs matched to Mark and the blood spatter patterns consistent with the prosecution's account of the murder. The rental car evidence was also presented, along with security camera footage, showing a figure matching Mark's description near Sydney's house on the morning of the crime. Detective Hawkins took the stand, detailing the investigation and the mounting evidence that led to Mark's arrest. She presented Mark's computer searches in the shrine found in his apartment, painting a picture of a man obsessed and spiraling out of control. A parade of witnesses took the stand, each adding to the portrait of a tragedy years in the making. Zendaya's teachers testified about the child's increasing anxiety and behavioral issues, which they attributed to the high-conflict divorce. Sydney's friends and colleagues spoke of her fear of Mark and her efforts to protect Zendaya from the escalating tension. Mark's defense team attempted to paint a picture of a loving father, driven to desperation by a biased court system and a vindictive ex-wife. They suggested that Sydney had been the one alienating Zendaya from her father, causing Mark's mental state to deteriorate. The defense also tried to cast doubt on the forensic evidence, suggesting that the crime scene had been contaminated and that the DNA evidence was inconclusive. They presented character witnesses who spoke of Mark's previous reputation as a dedicated father and successful lawyer. However, their efforts were largely overshadowed by the mountain of evidence against Mark and his own erratic behavior during the trial. After a 3-week trial and 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read, broken only by a muffled sob from Mark's mother. Mark, given the opportunity to speak, showed little remorse. In a rambling statement, he continued to blame Sydney and the court system for his actions, claiming he had only wanted to protect his daughter. The judge delivered a scathing rebuke before announcing the sentence. "Mr. Thornton, your actions have not only taken a life but have irrevocably damaged your daughter, the very person you claimed to be protecting. You have displayed a shocking lack of empathy and an inability to put your child's needs before your own desires." She then sentenced Mark Thornton to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. In the years following the trial, Zendaya Thornton remained in the care of her maternal grandparents. With ongoing therapy and support, she slowly began to heal from the trauma of losing both parents in such a tragic manner. The case led to reforms in the family court system, with increased resources allocated for mental health evaluations and support services for high-conflict divorces. Sydney Watkins' memory lived on through a foundation established in her name, dedicated to supporting children affected by domestic violence. As for Mark Thornton, he spends his days in a maximum security prison, his attempts at appeal repeatedly denied, forever marked as the man who destroyed his family in a misguided attempt to keep it together. The quiet town of Greenfield was shaken to its core when the body of Jack Thompson was discovered in his modest home on the outskirts of town. Jack, a well-liked middle-aged man known for his generosity and calm demeanor, had recently gone through a tumultuous divorce from his wife, Layla. The divorce, finalized just months prior, had left Jack visibly strained, but no one could have anticipated the tragic end he would meet. Layla Thompson, once the high school sweetheart and longtime partner of Jack, had quickly moved on after their split. She found solace in Derek Stone, a charismatic yet troubled man with a shadowy past. Derek, a former convict with a history of violent offenses, had swept Layla off her feet, bringing a sense of danger and excitement into her life that she had never experienced before. The discovery of Jack's lifeless body under suspicious circumstances set off a whirlwind investigation that uncovered a tangled web of deceit, betrayal, and revenge. The love triangle between Jack, Layla, and Derek became the focal point of the investigation, revealing dark secrets and motives that lay hidden beneath the surface. Greenfield's local police force, led by Detective Sarah Lawson, was tasked with untangling the complex relationships and finding the truth behind Jack's untimely death. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that this was not just a simple case of a crime of passion, but a meticulously planned act of vengeance. In the weeks that followed, the town would witness shocking revelations and unexpected twists, as the true nature of the relationships between Jack, Layla, and Derek came to light. The line between victim and perpetrator blurred, leaving everyone to wonder who could be trusted and who was hiding the darkest secrets. Jack and Layla Thompson's marriage had once been the epitome of stability and love. They had met in high school, their romance blossoming over the years into a marriage that seemed unbreakable. Jack, a kind-hearted man with a steady job as a schoolteacher, had always been the rock in their relationship. Layla, a nurse at the local hospital, complemented his steadiness with her nurturing and compassionate nature. However, as the years passed, the spark in their relationship began to fade. The stresses of daily life, combined with their inability to have children, placed a strain on their marriage. Layla's desire for excitement and change grew, leading her to seek solace outside their relationship. This quest for something new ultimately led her to Derek Stone. Derek Stone was a man with a troubled past. He had spent several years in prison for armed robbery and assault, but upon his release, he had vowed to turn his life around. His rugged good looks and charm quickly won Layla over, offering her the thrill and unpredictability she craved. Derek's presence in her life provided a stark contrast to the stability she had known with Jack. The affair between Layla and Derek was passionate and intense, leading to the eventual breakdown of her marriage to Jack. The divorce was bitter, with accusations and recriminations flying from both sides. Jack was devastated, unable to comprehend how the woman he had loved for so long could betray him in such a manner. Layla, on the other hand, felt liberated, ready to start a new chapter with Derek. Despite his attempts to move on, Jack found it difficult to let go of the past. He remained deeply in love with Layla, his heart aching at the thought of her with another man. His friends and colleagues noticed the change in him, his once cheerful demeanor replaced by a quiet sadness. Jack's attempts to rekindle his relationship with Layla were met with hostility, further deepening his despair. Derek, meanwhile, harbored his own grudges. He resented Jack for the hold he still seemed to have over Layla, and his violent tendencies began to resurface. Derek's jealousy and possessiveness became more pronounced, leading to frequent arguments with Layla. Despite this, Layla remained committed to Derek, convinced that their love was worth the turmoil. As the months passed, the tension between Jack, Layla, and Derek grew, setting the stage for the tragic events that were about to unfold. The love triangle, fraught with jealousy and resentment, would soon explode in a manner that would shock the entire town of Greenfield and leave a trail of devastation in its wake. The crisp autumn morning was shattered by the piercing scream of Mrs. Henderson, Jack's elderly neighbor, as she discovered his lifeless body sprawled across the living room floor. She had come over to check on Jack after noticing that his mail had piled up over the past few days. Her concern quickly turned to horror as she stumbled upon the gruesome scene. The local police were called immediately, and within minutes Detective Sarah Lawson and her team arrived at the scene. The sight that greeted them was both disturbing and puzzling. Jack's body lay in a pool of blood, his face contorted in a grimace of pain. There were signs of a violent struggle, with furniture overturned and broken glass scattered across the floor. As the forensic team began their meticulous work, Detective Lawson interviewed Mrs. Henderson. The elderly woman, still visibly shaken, recounted her discovery and her interactions with Jack in the days leading up to his death. She mentioned hearing raised voices coming from Jack's house a few nights before, but she had assumed it was just another argument between him and Layla. Layla and Derek were quickly brought in for questioning. Layla appeared distraught, her eyes red from crying. Derek, on the other hand, was stoic, his expression unreadable. Detective Lawson noted the stark contrast between the two, her instincts telling her that there was more to their story than met the eye. Layla recounted her last interaction with Jack. She claimed that she had not seen him for several days, and that their last conversation had been about finalizing the sale of their former home. Derek corroborated Layla's account, stating that they had spent the night of Jack's death at his apartment, miles away from the crime scene. Despite their alibis, Detective Lawson couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She ordered a thorough search of Derek's apartment and began to dig deeper into his past. The initial results of the forensic analysis pointed towards a struggle, with Jack having put up a significant fight against his attacker. There were signs of blunt force trauma to his head, suggesting that he had been struck multiple times with a heavy object. The discovery of a bloodied baseball bat in Jack's garage further complicated the investigation. The bat had Jack's fingerprints on it, but there were also smudges that suggested someone else had handled it. Detective Lawson sent the bat to the lab for further analysis, hoping it would provide a crucial lead. The townspeople of Greenfield were abuzz with speculation. Theories ranged from a robbery gone wrong to a crime of passion. Jack's friends and colleagues were interviewed, painting a picture of a man who was deeply troubled but not without enemies. Layla and Derek's tumultuous relationship became a focal point of the investigation, with many suspecting that their involvement went beyond just an affair. Detective Lawson knew that unraveling the truth behind Jack's death would require piecing together the fragmented lives of the people involved. The love triangle between Jack, Layla, and Derek was fraught with complexities, and she was determined to uncover every hidden detail, no matter how dark or disturbing. The investigation into Jack Thompson's murder began in earnest, with Detective Sarah Lawson leading the charge. Her first step was to establish a timeline of events leading up to Jack's death. She and her team interviewed neighbors, friends, and family, piecing together the last known movements of Jack, Layla, and Derek. The neighbors provided a wealth of information. Several had heard loud arguments coming from Jack's house in the days before his death. One neighbor, Mr. Parker, reported seeing a shadowy figure lurking around Jack's property late at night, although he couldn't provide a clear description. Another neighbor, Mrs. Green, mentioned seeing Layla leave Jack's house in a hurry the day before his body was found. Detective Lawson interviewed Layla's colleagues at the hospital, who described her as a dedicated nurse, but noted that she had become increasingly distracted and agitated in recent months. One colleague, Susan, recalled Layla confiding in her about the stress of her divorce and her volatile relationship with Derek. Susan mentioned that Layla had expressed fear for her safety on several occasions, hinting at Derek's violent tendencies. The investigation also delved into Derek's background. Detective Lawson discovered that Derek had a history of violence and had been in and out of prison for various offenses, including assault and armed robbery. She interviewed some of Derek's former associates, who painted a picture of a man prone to explosive outbursts and a deep-seated need for control. One former associate, Mike, mentioned that Derek had often talked about exacting revenge on anyone who wronged him. Despite Derek's troubling past, his alibi for the night of Jack's murder seemed solid. However, Detective Lawson couldn't ignore the mounting evidence that suggested he had a motive for wanting Jack out of the picture. The discovery of Jack's blood on Derek's shoes, found during the search of his apartment, further fueled her suspicions. Layla's inconsistent statements also raised red flags. During her initial interview, she had claimed not to have seen Jack for days. However, Mrs. Green's account contradicted this, placing Layla at Jack's house the day before his death. When confronted with this discrepancy, Layla became defensive, insisting that she had only gone to collect some personal belongings and had left after a brief argument. As the investigation progressed, Detective Lawson uncovered a series of text messages between Layla and Derek that suggested they had discussed plans to confront Jack about his continued interference in their relationship. The messages hinted at a growing frustration with Jack and a desire to put an end to the constant conflict. Despite the mounting evidence, the case was far from straightforward. Detective Lawson knew that she needed more concrete proof to build a solid case against Derek and Layla. She ordered a thorough analysis of the crime scene, hoping to find forensic evidence that would link them directly to Jack's murder. The community of Greenfield watched anxiously as the investigation unfolded. The once quiet town was now the center of a media frenzy, with reporters flocking to cover the sensational story. The pressure on Detective Lawson and her team was immense, but she remained steadfast in her determination to uncover the truth and bring justice to Jack Thompson. As the investigation into Jack Thompson's murder deepened, suspicions surrounding Layla and Derek grew more pronounced. Detective Lawson and her team scrutinized every detail, piecing together the puzzle that seemed to implicate both Layla and Derek in Jack's death. Layla's behavior became increasingly erratic. Her initial grief gave way to a defensive and hostile attitude during subsequent interviews. When questioned about her presence at Jack's house, she provided conflicting accounts, further muddying the waters. Her colleagues at the hospital noted her frequent absences and whispered conversations on her phone, fueling speculation about her involvement in something sinister. Detective Lawson also focused on Derek's suspicious behavior. Despite his alibi, there were inconsistencies that couldn't be ignored. Derek had claimed to be at his apartment on the night of the murder, but surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showed his car on the road during the time frame in question. The footage, though grainy, provided enough evidence to warrant further investigation. The discovery of Jack's blood on Derek's shoes was a significant breakthrough. Forensic analysis confirmed that the blood matched Jack's, placing Derek at the crime scene. When confronted with this evidence, Derek's composure cracked. He denied any involvement, claiming that he had been framed, but his increasingly erratic behavior only deepened Detective Lawson's suspicions. Layla's phone records revealed a series of heated exchanges between her and Derek in the days leading up to Jack's murder. The messages hinted at a plan to confront Jack and put an end to the constant turmoil he was causing in their lives. The tone of the messages grew more aggressive, with Derek urging Layla to take decisive action. One particular message stood out. Derek had texted Layla the night before the murder, saying, "It's time we take care of this once and for all." Layla's response was cryptic, but seemed to indicate her agreement. The messages provided a chilling glimpse into the escalating tension between the three individuals. Detective Lawson's team also uncovered financial records that revealed Layla had recently taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Jack. The policy, worth a significant amount, named Layla as the sole beneficiary. The timing of the policy raised eyebrows, suggesting a possible financial motive for Jack's murder. As the evidence mounted, Detective Lawson knew she needed a confession to solidify the case. She decided to apply pressure on Layla, hoping to exploit the cracks in her story. During a tense interrogation, Layla finally broke down. She admitted to visiting Jack's house the day before his death, but insisted that she had left before anything happened. She claimed that Derek had become increasingly unhinged, pressuring her to cut all ties with Jack. Detective Lawson also interviewed Derek's former associates again, this time focusing on his violent tendencies and potential motive. Mike, the former associate who had mentioned Derek's penchant for revenge, revealed that Derek had often spoken about wanting to eliminate anyone who threatened his relationship with Layla. Despite the mounting evidence against Derek, the investigation faced a critical juncture. Detective Lawson needed concrete proof to link Derek directly to the crime. She ordered a comprehensive search of Derek's apartment, hoping to uncover the final piece of the puzzle that would bring justice to Jack Thompson. As the investigation into Jack Thompson's murder continued, Detective Sarah Lawson delved deeper into Derek Stone's past. The more she uncovered, the more it became clear that Derek was a man with a history of violence and a potential for revenge. Derek's criminal record revealed a series of offenses dating back to his teenage years. He had been involved in gang activities, petty thefts, and assaults. His most serious conviction, however, was for armed robbery, which had landed him in prison for several years. During his incarceration, Derek had been involved in multiple altercations with other inmates, further highlighting his violent tendencies. Detective Lawson interviewed some of Derek's former associates, hoping to gain insight into his behavior and motives. Mike, the associate who had previously hinted at Derek's vengeful nature, provided a chilling account of Derek's time in prison. According to Mike, Derek had developed a reputation for being ruthless and unforgiving, often targeting those who crossed him or posed a threat. One former associate, Steve, recounted a particularly disturbing incident. Derek had been involved in a violent altercation with another inmate who had insulted him. The fight had left the inmate severely injured, and Derek had shown no remorse. Steve described Derek as a man who thrived on control and power, traits that had only intensified during his time behind bars. Detective Lawson also discovered that Derek had a history of unstable relationships. His ex-girlfriend, Lisa, came forward with her own harrowing account of their time together. Lisa described Derek as charming and attentive at first, but his demeanor quickly changed. He became possessive and abusive, isolating her from friends and family. She eventually managed to escape the relationship, but remained fearful of Derek's potential for violence. Lisa's account provided further insight into Derek's character. She mentioned that Derek had often spoken about his desire for revenge against anyone who wronged him. He harbored deep-seated grudges and was willing to go to great lengths to settle scores. Detective Lawson realized that Derek's relationship with Layla and his resentment towards Jack fit this pattern perfectly. Armed with this new information, Detective Lawson intensified her efforts to find concrete evidence linking Derek to Jack's murder. She ordered a comprehensive search of Derek's apartment, hoping to uncover any items that could connect him to the crime scene. The search yielded several pieces of potential evidence, including a set of keys that matched the locks on Jack's house and a blood-stained shirt hidden in the back of Derek's closet. Forensic analysis confirmed that the blood on the shirt matched Jack's, providing a direct link between Derek and the crime. This discovery was a significant breakthrough, but Detective Lawson knew that it was not enough on its own to secure a conviction. She needed a confession or additional evidence to solidify the case. Detective Lawson decided to confront Derek with the new evidence, hoping to elicit a reaction. During the interrogation, Derek's composure began to crack. He vehemently denied any involvement, but his increasingly erratic behavior suggested otherwise. Layla, who had been brought in for questioning once again, appeared visibly shaken when confronted with the evidence against Derek. In a desperate bid to save herself, Layla began to distance herself from Derek. She claimed that he had manipulated her and that she had been too afraid to leave him. Layla's statements, while self-serving, provided further insight into the toxic and volatile nature of their relationship. Detective Lawson knew she was close to unraveling the truth, but she needed one final push to bring the case to its conclusion. As the investigation reached its critical juncture, new evidence and unexpected revelations added further complexity to the case. Detective Sarah Lawson and her team were determined to untangle the web of deceit that surrounded Jack Thompson's murder. One of the most significant breakthroughs came from an unexpected source. A former inmate who had shared a cell with Derek, named Tony, came forward with crucial information. Tony revealed that Derek had confided in him about his plan to get rid of Jack. According to Tony, Derek had expressed his frustration with Jack's continued presence in Layla's life and had boasted about his intention to eliminate the problem once and for all. Tony's account added weight to the theory that Derek had premeditated the murder. He provided specific details that matched the evidence found at the crime scene, including the use of the baseball bat as the murder weapon. Tony's testimony was a game-changer, providing the corroboration Detective Lawson needed to build a solid case against Derek. However, the investigation took an unexpected turn when Layla's secret was uncovered. Detective Lawson's team discovered a series of hidden bank accounts in Layla's name, containing large sums of money that she had been siphoning off over the past few years. This revelation raised questions about Layla's true motives and her potential involvement in the murder. Layla's financial records revealed that she had been planning to leave Derek and start a new life. She had been saving money in secret, waiting for the right moment to make her escape. This newfound information painted a different picture of Layla, suggesting that she might have had her own reasons for wanting Jack out of the way. Detective Lawson confronted Layla with the evidence of the hidden bank accounts. Layla broke down, admitting that she had been trapped in a toxic and abusive relationship with Derek. She confessed that she had feared for her life and had been planning to escape, but insisted that she had no involvement in Jack's murder. Layla claimed that Derek had acted alone, driven by his own jealous rage. As the investigation unfolded, another twist emerged. A third party, previously unknown to the investigators, was discovered to have had contact with both Layla and Derek. This individual, named Ryan, was a former colleague of Derek's from his criminal days. Ryan had recently been released from prison and had reconnected with Derek. Detective Lawson brought Ryan in for questioning, hoping to uncover his role in the case. Ryan admitted to meeting with Derek and Layla on several occasions, but denied any involvement in the murder. However, his statements were inconsistent, and his nervous demeanor suggested that he was hiding something. The investigation took a dramatic turn when Ryan's fingerprints were found on the baseball bat used to kill Jack. Under intense interrogation, Ryan finally cracked. He confessed that Derek had enlisted his help in carrying out the murder, promising him a share of the life insurance money that Layla had taken out on Jack. Ryan revealed that Derek had planned every detail, from the initial confrontation to the disposal of evidence. Ryan's confession provided the missing piece of the puzzle, implicating both Derek and himself in the murder. Layla's role remained murky, but the evidence suggested that she had been a pawn in Derek's twisted game. Detective Lawson knew that the case was far from straightforward, but she was determined to bring those responsible to justice. With Ryan's confession in hand, Detective Sarah Lawson prepared for the final confrontation. She knew that Derek Stone would not go down without a fight, and she braced herself for a tense and potentially dangerous encounter. Detective Lawson and her team planned a coordinated effort to arrest Derek. They decided to approach him at his apartment, where he had been staying with Layla. The element of surprise was crucial, as they anticipated that Derek might attempt to flee or react violently. On the day of the operation, the team moved swiftly and efficiently. Detective Lawson knocked on Derek's door, her heart pounding with anticipation. Derek answered, his expression a mix of surprise and defiance. Detective Lawson presented the evidence and Ryan's confession, informing Derek that he was under arrest for the murder of Jack Thompson. Derek's reaction was immediate and explosive. He lunged at Detective Lawson, shouting accusations and threats. The officers quickly subdued him, but not before Derek managed to land a few blows. His resistance only served to reinforce the image of a violent and unstable individual, further sealing his fate. As Derek was taken into custody, Layla was brought in for questioning once again. The revelation of Ryan's involvement had shaken her, and she seemed genuinely terrified of Derek. Layla insisted that she had been unaware of the full extent of Derek's plan, and that she had never intended for Jack to be harmed. Despite Layla's claims, the evidence suggested that she had at least some knowledge of Derek's intentions. Detective Lawson pressed her for details, hoping to unravel the final threads of the case. Under intense questioning, Layla admitted that she had suspected Derek was planning something, but had been too afraid to confront him. The climax of the investigation came when Derek, now facing the reality of his situation, decided to cut a deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he agreed to provide a full confession and implicate Layla in the planning of the murder. Derek's confession was chilling, detailing the calculated and cold-blooded manner in which he had orchestrated Jack's death. Derek revealed that he had manipulated Layla into taking out the life insurance policy on Jack, promising her a future free from financial worries. He had then enlisted Ryan's help, using his former associate's desperation and loyalty to carry out the crime. Derek admitted that he had been driven by jealousy and a desire for control, unable to tolerate Jack's continued presence in Layla's life. Layla, confronted with Derek's confession, broke down completely. She admitted to her role in the plan, though she maintained that she had never intended for Jack to be killed. Her fear of Derek and her desire for freedom had clouded her judgment, leading her down a dark and tragic path. With both Derek and Layla in custody, the case against them was solid. The legal proceedings moved swiftly, with Derek receiving a life sentence for his role as the mastermind behind the murder. Layla, though complicit, received a lesser sentence due to her cooperation and the evidence of her abusive relationship with Derek. The town of Greenfield, though forever changed by the events, found a renewed sense of unity and resilience. The legacy of Jack Thompson lived on, a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of seeking justice for those who could no longer speak for themselves. Remington Harlow, a successful software engineer, and his wife Cordelia, a talented interior designer, were the picture of marital bliss to their friends and neighbors. Their home, with its manicured lawn and white picket fence, stood as a testament to their seemingly perfect life. But beneath the surface, a dark current was stirring. Remington's growing fascination with a taboo fantasy would set in motion a chain of events that would shatter their idyllic existence and end in tragedy. What began as a consensual exploration of desires would spiral into a maelstrom of jealousy, betrayal, and ultimately murder. Remington Harlow was born in 1985 to a middle-class family in Eugene. From an early age, he displayed a keen intellect and a fascination with computers. His parents, both educators, nurtured his interests, and by the time he entered high school, Remington was already coding his own programs. Despite his academic prowess, he struggled socially, often feeling awkward and out of place among his peers. Cordelia Astor, born in 1987, grew up in a wealthy family in Seattle, Washington. The youngest of 3 children, she was vivacious and creative from the start. Her parents, successful real estate developers, provided her with every opportunity, including art classes and interior design courses. Their paths crossed in 2005 at Reed College in Portland. Remington, a junior computer science major, literally bumped into Cordelia, a freshman art student in the campus library. He was immediately smitten by her radiant smile and effortless charm. Cordelia, in turn, found herself drawn to Remington's quiet intensity and brilliant mind. Their courtship was a whirlwind of intellectual discussions, late-night coding sessions, where Cordelia would sketch while Remington typed, and explorations of Portland's eclectic art scene. Despite their different backgrounds and personalities, they found in each other a perfect complement. They married in 2009, shortly after Cordelia's graduation. The wedding, held in a picturesque vineyard in the Willamette Valley, was a joyous affair that seemed to portend a bright future. Remington had already secured a high-paying job at a tech startup in Portland, while Cordelia began to make a name for herself in the city's competitive interior design market. For the first few years of their marriage, life seemed perfect. They bought their dream home in Oak Ridge, traveled the world, and built a wide circle of friends. Remington's career soared as he climbed the corporate ladder, eventually becoming a senior engineer at a tech firm. Cordelia's design business flourished, with her work featured in several magazines. From the outside, the Harlows appeared to have it all: successful careers, a beautiful home, and a strong, loving marriage. But as they entered their 30s, subtle cracks began to form in their seemingly flawless facade, setting the stage for the tumultuous events to come. As the Harlows approached their 10th wedding anniversary, a restlessness began to creep into their relationship. The passion that had once burned so brightly had dimmed to a comfortable, but sometimes monotonous glow. Remington, always introspective, found himself increasingly drawn to online forums and discussions about alternative sexual lifestyles. It started innocently enough, a curiosity about what other couples did to spice up their love lives. But as Remington delved deeper into these virtual communities, he became particularly fascinated by the concept of cuckolding. The idea of watching his wife with another man, of being a voyeur to her pleasure, awakened something within him. At first, Remington kept these thoughts to himself, ashamed and confused by the intensity of his desires. He would stay up late, ostensibly working, but in reality, he was consuming every piece of cuckold-related content he could find. Cordelia, perceptive as ever, sensed the change in her husband. She noticed his distraction, the way his eyes would sometimes glaze over during their conversations, the increased frequency of his late nights at the computer. Concerned, she gently probed, asking if everything was all right, if work was becoming too stressful. Finally, after weeks of internal struggle, Remington decided to broach the subject with Cordelia. One evening over a bottle of wine, he haltingly confessed his newfound interest. He spoke of his desires, his curiosity about exploring this fantasy, all the while watching Cordelia's face for signs of disgust or rejection. To his surprise and relief, Cordelia didn't recoil. Instead, she listened with an open mind, asking thoughtful questions about what exactly appealed to him about this scenario. While she expressed initial reservations, she also admitted to a certain intrigue. The idea of being desired by another man, of being the center of attention, held its own allure. This conversation marked a turning point in their marriage. What had been a private fantasy for Remington was now out in the open, a possibility to be explored together. Neither of them could have predicted the profound impact this revelation would have on their lives, or the dangerous path it would ultimately lead them down. The Harlows' foray into the world of cuckolding began cautiously. They set ground rules, discussed boundaries, and agreed to take things slowly. But finding the right person to introduce into their marriage proved challenging. They wanted someone attractive and charismatic, but also discreet and respectful of their arrangement. Enter Thaddeus Blackwood. Cordelia met him at a charity art auction in downtown Portland. Tall, with piercing green eyes, Thaddeus exuded a magnetic charm that drew people to him. As the owner of a successful art gallery, he moved effortlessly through Portland's cultural elite, his wit and knowledge making him the center of attention at any gathering. Cordelia was immediately drawn to Thaddeus's sophisticated aura. They spent the evening in animated conversation about emerging artists and the latest trends in interior design. When Thaddeus casually mentioned being unattached and open to new experiences, Cordelia felt a spark of excitement. She relayed her encounter to Remington that night, watching his eyes light up as she described Thaddeus. They agreed that he might be the perfect candidate for their exploration. Remington encouraged Cordelia to nurture the connection, his excitement palpable. Over the next few weeks, Cordelia and Thaddeus met for coffee several times, ostensibly to discuss potential collaborations between his gallery and her design firm. Each time, Cordelia returned home to regale Remington with stories of their encounters, stoking the flames of his fantasy. Finally, after a particularly flirtatious meeting, Cordelia decided it was time to broach the subject with Thaddeus. To her surprise and delight, he was intrigued by the proposition. He admitted to having participated in similar arrangements before and understood the delicacy required. With Thaddeus on board, the stage was set for the Harlows to turn fantasy into reality. Little did they know that this decision would set in motion a series of events that would irrevocably change their lives. The night of the first encounter arrived with a mix of nervous energy and excited anticipation. Remington and Cordelia had spent weeks planning every detail, from the ambient lighting in their bedroom to the bottle of expensive champagne chilling in an ice bucket. Thaddeus arrived at 8 p.m. sharp, looking dashing in a tailored charcoal suit. He brought with him a bouquet of exotic flowers for Cordelia and a rare bottle of scotch for Remington, a gesture that impressed them both with its thoughtfulness. The evening began in the living room with drinks and light conversation. Thaddeus regaled them with stories from the art world, his charisma on full display. Cordelia, dressed in a slinky black dress, laughed at his jokes and touched his arm with increasing frequency. Remington watched from his armchair, a tumbler of scotch in hand, his heart racing with every interaction between his wife and their guest. As the night progressed and the alcohol flowed, the atmosphere grew charged with sexual tension. Finally, with a meaningful look at Remington, Cordelia took Thaddeus by the hand and led him upstairs. In the bedroom, Remington settled into a corner armchair as Cordelia and Thaddeus began to kiss passionately. When Thaddeus and Cordelia finally fell onto the bed, their bodies entwined, Remington felt a potent mix of arousal and an unexpected twinge of jealousy. The encounter itself was intense and passionate. Remington watched, transfixed, as his fantasy played out before his eyes. The reality was more visceral, more overwhelming than he had imagined. Afterwards, as they all lay spent and silent, Remington felt a complex swirl of emotions. There was satisfaction, certainly. His long-held fantasy had been realized, but there was also a nagging sense of unease, a feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Thaddeus left shortly after, with promises to stay in touch. As Remington and Cordelia lay in bed, discussing the evening's events in hushed, excited tones, neither could have predicted how this first encounter would set the stage for the tragedy to come. They had opened Pandora's box, and there would be no closing it again. Encouraged by the success of their first foray into cuckolding, they eagerly arranged more meetings with Thaddeus. What had started as a monthly indulgence quickly became then weekly. Each encounter seemed to push the boundaries further, with Thaddeus staying longer, the sessions growing more intense and intimate. Remington's role began to evolve as well. Cordelia said in an interview that he was initially content to watch from afar. He found himself drawn closer to the action. Sometimes he would join in, and that the dynamics of power and control within their bedroom became increasingly complex. Outside of their encounters, Thaddeus began to integrate more into their lives. He would join them for dinner, accompany Cordelia to art exhibitions, even spend weekends at their home. His charm and wit made him a delightful companion, and the Harlows found themselves enjoying his company even when action wasn't on the agenda. As spring turned to summer, Remington's initial excitement began to give way to a gnawing sense of discomfort. He started to notice small but significant changes in Cordelia's behavior. She seemed distracted during their alone time, her mind elsewhere. She began to dress up more often, even on days when they had no plans with Thaddeus. One evening, Remington came home early from work to find Cordelia on the phone, speaking in hushed, intimate tones. When she saw him, she quickly ended the call, claiming it was just a client. But Remington couldn't shake the feeling that she had been talking to Thaddeus. In bed, Cordelia's passion seemed to have cooled. She was still enthusiastic during their encounters with Thaddeus, but alone with Remington, she often seemed tired or disinterested. Remington found himself initiating sex more often, only to be gently rebuffed. Remington tried to reassert control over the situation. He suggested taking a break from their arrangement, perhaps going on a vacation, just the two of them. But Cordelia seemed reluctant, always finding reasons to delay or change the subject. His work began to suffer as he spent hours analyzing every interaction, every text message, every glance between Cordelia and Thaddeus. He started checking Cordelia's phone when she wasn't looking, scrutinizing her social media activity, even contemplating following her when she went out alone. Remington knew he was spiraling, but he felt powerless to stop it. The game he had initiated was slipping out of his control, and he was terrified of losing Cordelia. As his anxiety grew, so did his determination to put an end to the situation he had created, by any means necessary. The breaking point came on a warm July evening. Remington had planned a romantic dinner at home, hoping to reconnect with Cordelia and discuss his growing concerns. He had left work early, bought her favorite wine, and spent hours preparing an elaborate meal. But as the sun began to set and the candles burned low, Cordelia was nowhere to be seen. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Hours ticked by, the carefully prepared food growing cold on the table. When she finally stumbled in shortly before midnight, her hair disheveled and lipstick smudged, Remington's worst fears seemed confirmed. The argument that ensued was explosive. Remington, his emotions amplified by alcohol and hours of anxious waiting, unleashed all the fears and suspicions he'd been harboring. He accused Cordelia of falling in love with Thaddeus, of making a fool of him, of destroying their marriage. Cordelia, caught off guard and defensive, initially tried to deflect. She claimed she'd lost track of time at a client meeting, that her phone had died. But faced with Remington's relentless questioning and the evidence of her appearance, she finally broke down and admitted she had been with Thaddeus. The confession hit Remington like a physical blow. He had suspected, had feared, but hearing it confirmed shattered something inside him. In that moment, all the excitement and thrill of their arrangement went away. Cordelia, tears streaming down her face, tried to explain. She loved Remington, she insisted, but Thaddeus made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. She was confused, torn between her loyalty to her husband and her deepening emotions for Thaddeus. Remington, his voice low and dangerous, demanded that she end things with Thaddeus immediately. Cordelia, her own anger rising, refused. This had been Remington's idea in the first place, she argued. He couldn't dictate her feelings or control her relationships. The argument escalated, with both of them saying hurtful things they would later regret. Remington, in a moment of rage, smashed a wine glass against the wall. Cordelia, shocked by this uncharacteristic display of violence, retreated to the guest bedroom, locking the door behind her. Remington spent the night on the couch, his mind racing, unable to sleep. In the days following their confrontation, a chilling calm settled over the Harlow household. Cordelia and Remington moved around each other like ghosts, barely speaking, the tension palpable. Cordelia spent most of her time out of the house, throwing herself into her work, and Remington suspected meeting with Thaddeus. Remington, for his part, retreated into a dark place within himself. He called in sick to work, spending his days in a haze of alcohol and paranoid thoughts. He scoured Cordelia's computer and phone for evidence of her relationship with Thaddeus, meticulously documenting every text, every call, every unexplained absence. Remington began to fantasize about confronting Thaddeus, about making him pay for destroying his marriage. At first, these were just harmless daydreams, a way to vent his frustration. But as the days wore on and Cordelia grew more distant, these fantasies took on a darker, more violent tone. One afternoon, while Cordelia was at a client meeting, Remington found himself in their garage holding the heavy wrench he used for home repairs. As he felt its weight in his hand, a chilling thought crossed his mind. It should be so easy to end this, and to eliminate the threat to his marriage once and for all. Horrified by the direction of his thoughts, Remington dropped the wrench and fled the garage. But the seed had been planted. As he paced the house, gulping down glasses of whiskey, the idea took root and grew. By the time night fell, what had started as a fleeting, horrifying thought had crystallized into a plan. August 15th dawned hot and humid, the air heavy with the promise of an approaching storm. Remington woke early, his head pounding from another night of heavy drinking, but his resolve unwavering. Today would be the day he confronted Thaddeus, the day he reclaimed control over his life and his marriage. He spent the morning in a feverish state of preparation. He showered, shaved, and dressed with meticulous care, as if preparing for an important business meeting rather than the violent confrontation he was planning. In the garage, he selected the wrench he had held days earlier, wrapping it in a towel and placing it in a nondescript gym bag. Cordelia left for work around 9 a.m., barely acknowledging Remington as she rushed out the door. As soon as she was gone, Remington got into his car and drove to Thaddeus's gallery. He parked across the street, watching as Thaddeus arrived, greeting his employees with his characteristic charm. For hours, Remington sat in his car. As closing time approached, Remington watched Thaddeus bid goodbye to his last customer and begin closing up the gallery. This was the moment he had been waiting for. With shaking hands, he grabbed the gym bag and crossed the street. Thaddeus was locking the gallery door when Remington approached. He turned, surprise flickering across his face before it settled into a wary smile. "Remington," he said, "this is unexpected. Is everything all right?" Remington felt a surge of rage at Thaddeus's casual tone, as if he hadn't been destroying Remington's life for months. Without conscious thought, he swung the gym bag, catching Thaddeus off guard and sending him stumbling back against the gallery door. What followed was a blur of violence and desperation. Remington pulled out the wrench, swinging it wildly as Thaddeus tried to defend himself. But Remington was beyond reason. Every blow was fueled by months of jealousy, insecurity, and rage. When it was over, Remington stood panting over Thaddeus's motionless body, the wrench slick with blood in his trembling hand. The reality of what he had done crashed over him like a tidal wave. He had just killed a man. He had just destroyed his own life in a futile attempt to save it. Remington went through the motions of covering his tracks. He dragged Thaddeus's body into the alley behind the gallery, hiding it behind a dumpster. He wiped down the door handle and any surfaces he might have touched. Then, still in a state of shock, he drove home, the weight of his actions settling over him like a shroud. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke as Remington pulled into his driveway, the rain washing away the blood on his hands, but doing nothing to cleanse his conscience. The hours following the murder passed in a nightmarish blur for Remington. He stumbled into the house, barely making it to the bathroom before violently emptying the contents of his stomach. As the adrenaline wore off, the full impact of his actions hit him. He had killed a man. He was a murderer. Operating on autopilot, Remington set about destroying evidence. He burned his clothes in the backyard fire pit, scrubbed the car clean, and took a shower. When Cordelia came home, Remington had composed himself enough to feign normalcy. He greeted her with forced cheerfulness, suggesting they order takeout and watch a movie. As they sat on the couch, the TV flickering unwatched, Remington's mind raced. He knew it was only a matter of time before Thaddeus's body was discovered. He needed an alibi, a story to tell when the inevitable questions came. He casually mentioned to Cordelia that he had spent the day at home catching up on work and doing some yard work. He even showed her a small cut on his hand, claiming he had nicked himself while pruning the rose bushes, a cut that had actually come from his struggle with Thaddeus. 2 days after the murder, the news broke. Thaddeus Blackwood, prominent art dealer and fixture of Portland's cultural scene, had been found dead behind his shop. The police were treating it as a homicide. Remington learned of the discovery while at work, overhearing colleagues discussing the shocking news. He felt the blood drain from his face, his hands shaking so badly he had to excuse himself to the restroom. The investigation moved quickly. Detective Eliana Rossi, a veteran of the Police Bureau's Homicide Division, took charge of the case. She and her team combed through Thaddeus's life, interviewing friends, family, and business associates. It didn't take long for them to uncover Thaddeus's relationship with the Harlows. Cordelia, devastated by the news of Thaddeus's death, initially tried to downplay their connection, but faced with evidence from Thaddeus's phone records and witness accounts, she eventually admitted to their affair. When the police came to interview Remington, he was prepared. He expressed shock and sadness at Thaddeus's death, acknowledging that while their arrangement had been unconventional, he had considered Thaddeus a friend. He calmly recounted his movements on the day of the murder, his story aligning perfectly with what he had told Cordelia. Detective Rossi, however, sensed something off about Remington's demeanor. His calm seemed forced, his grief a touch too performative. She made a mental note to dig deeper into his background and movements. As the investigation progressed, the police began to piece together a timeline of Thaddeus's last day. Security footage from nearby businesses showed him entering the gallery in the morning but never leaving. His last phone call had been to Cordelia, ending abruptly around closing time. The net was slowly closing around Remington. As the days turned into weeks, Cordelia's grief over Thaddeus's death deepened. She threw herself into her work, often staying late at the office, avoiding the stilted silences that now characterized her home life with Remington. At first, Remington's attentiveness in the wake of the tragedy had touched her. He seemed genuinely concerned for her well-being, always ready with a comforting word or a shoulder to cry on. But as time passed, she began to notice inconsistencies in his behavior. Cordelia found herself revisiting the events leading up to Thaddeus's death. She remembered Remington's jealousy, his desperate pleas for her to end the affair. The more she thought about it, the more a terrible suspicion began to take root in her mind. She started paying closer attention to Remington's actions, noting when he left the house, checking his browser history when he wasn't around. She even considered hiring a private investigator, but couldn't bring herself to take that final step. As her suspicions grew, so did her fear. If Remington was capable of what she was beginning to suspect, what else might he be capable of? For the first time in their marriage, Cordelia found herself afraid of her husband, unsure of the man she had promised to love for better or worse. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source. A homeless man, known to frequent the alley behind Thaddeus's gallery, came forward with information. He claimed to have seen a man matching Remington's description entering the alley on the night of the murder, carrying a gym bag. This new lead energized the investigation. Detective Rossi and her team began to scrutinize Remington's movements more closely. They discovered traffic camera footage that contradicted his alibi, showing his car near the gallery around the time of the murder. As the evidence mounted, Remington's behavior became increasingly erratic. He started drinking heavily, snapping at colleagues, and becoming paranoid about being followed. Cordelia, her own suspicions now seeming confirmed, began to distance herself from him, staying with a friend under the guise of needing space to grieve. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when the police, armed with a search warrant, found small traces of blood in Remington's car that matched Thaddeus's DNA. They also discovered the murder weapon, the blood-stained wrench that Remington had hidden in the attic, unable to bring himself to dispose of it completely. On a rainy September morning, nearly a month after Thaddeus's death, Detective Rossi arrived at the Harlow residence with a team of officers. They found Remington sitting in the living room, a half-empty bottle of whiskey beside him. As the detective read him his rights, Remington offered no resistance. In that moment, he felt an odd sense of relief. The game was over. The lies, the fear, the constant vigilance. It could all stop now. Remington Harlow's trial was brief but sensational. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, his confession a rambling account of jealousy, fantasy, and fatal obsession. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Cordelia, shattered by the revelation of her husband's actions, filed for divorce shortly after his arrest. She sold their house, unable to live with the memories it held, and moved out of state to start a new life. At the center of this tragic tale were two individuals whose lives became inextricably intertwined. Evelyn Gosling, a 34-year-old English professor at Briarcliff Community College, was known for her brilliant mind and captivating lectures. Zane Holloway, a struggling freshman with dreams of becoming a writer, was drawn to her like a moth to a flame. What began as mentorship slowly twisted into a web of manipulation, desire, and ultimately murder. As investigators peeled back the layers of their relationship, they uncovered a dark tale of exploitation, obsession, twisted fantasies, and deadly desperation. Evelyn Gosling's journey to Briarcliff was paved with academic accolades and personal turmoil. Born to wealthy parents in Boston, Evelyn showed early signs of exceptional intelligence. Her father, a stern investment banker, and her mother, a socialite with a penchant for cocktails, provided Evelyn with every material advantage but little emotional support. From a young age, Evelyn learned to use her intellect as a shield, burying herself in books to escape the cold reality of her home life. She excelled in school, skipping 2 grades and entering Harvard. It was there that Evelyn discovered her passion for English literature and her talent for captivating an audience. After completing her PhD at Yale, Evelyn seemed destined for a prestigious position at an Ivy League institution. However, a scandal involving an affair with her married thesis advisor derailed those plans. The academic community's whispered judgments and thinly veiled rejection drove Evelyn to seek refuge in the small town of Briarcliff. At Briarcliff Community College, Evelyn quickly established herself as a rising star. Her lectures on Renaissance literature and modern poetry drew students from other departments, and her innovative teaching methods earned her the admiration of both colleagues and students. Dr. Gosling was the epitome of success, brilliant, beautiful, and dedicated to her craft. But beneath the polished exterior lay a woman haunted by her past and driven by an insatiable need for validation. Evelyn's relationships were often intense but short-lived, leaving her feeling empty and misunderstood. She craved the adoration of her students, basking in their admiration and subtly encouraging their dependence on her guidance. A psychological evaluation conducted after her arrest would later reveal a complex personality disorder characterized by narcissistic traits and a deep-seated fear of abandonment. It was this dangerous cocktail of intelligence, charisma, and unresolved emotional issues that set the stage for her fateful encounter with Zane Holloway. In him, Evelyn saw not just another student to mold, but a chance to reclaim the youth and passion she felt slipping away. Zane Holloway's path to Briarcliff Community College was far from typical. Born in a working-class neighborhood, Zane was the youngest of 4 children in a family that struggled to make ends meet. His father, a construction worker, spent long hours on job sites, while his mother juggled multiple part-time jobs to keep food on the table. From an early age, Zane found solace in the world of books. While his siblings excelled in sports and practical skills, Zane was the dreamer of the family. He would often be found scribbling stories in tattered notebooks or lost in the pages of worn paperbacks borrowed from the local library. Zane's high school years were marked by academic inconsistency. Brilliant in subjects that captured his imagination, like English and history, he struggled with the rigid structures of math and science. His guidance counselor, Ms. Ramirez, recalled, Zane had a spark of genius when it came to writing, but he lacked the discipline and confidence to truly shine. Despite his potential, Zane's grades were mediocre, and his SAT scores fell short of his aspirations. The rejection letters from his dream colleges were a bitter pill to swallow, but beneath Zane's artistic temperament lay a young man grappling with self-doubt and a desperate need for validation. It was this combination of raw talent, emotional vulnerability, and a burning desire to prove himself that made Zane the perfect target for Evelyn Gosling's manipulation. In her, he saw not just a mentor, but a gateway to the intellectual and artistic world he so desperately wanted to join. As the fall semester began, Zane could never have imagined that his pursuit of literary greatness would lead him down a dark path of ethical compromises, emotional entanglement, and ultimately to the shores of Lake Briarcliff, where his young life would be cut tragically short. The first day of advanced composition class was a turning point in both Evelyn and Zane's lives, though neither could have predicted the tragic course their paths would take. Evelyn, impeccably dressed in a tailored blazer and pencil skirt, commanded the room with her presence. Her eyes scanned the sea of fresh faces, pausing momentarily on Zane, hunched in the back row, nervously fiddling with his pen. As Evelyn launched into her introductory lecture on the power of narrative, Zane found himself captivated. Her words seemed to speak directly to him, igniting a passion he had long kept buried. When she asked the class to share their favorite authors, Zane surprised himself by raising his hand. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke of his admiration for James Baldwin, earning an approving nod from Evelyn. After class, Evelyn approached Zane. She'd been impressed by his insight and encouraged him to consider submitting work to the college literary magazine. Zane, flushed with pride, stammered his thanks. This brief interaction planted the seeds of what would become a dangerous obsession for both of them. Over the next few weeks, Zane became a fixture in Evelyn's office hours. What began as discussions about assignments gradually evolved into deep conversations about literature, life, and Zane's aspirations. Evelyn, recognizing Zane's raw talent and vulnerability, began to subtly shape their interactions. She would lean in closely when reviewing his work, her perfume lingering in the air. Her feedback was a careful mix of praise and criticism, designed to keep Zane constantly seeking her approval. She shared personal anecdotes, creating an illusion of intimacy that blurred the lines of the student-teacher relationship. Zane's classmate Amelia later told investigators, "We all noticed how Dr. Gosling treated Zane differently. At first, we were just jealous of the attention, but looking back, there was something off about it." As midterms approached, Zane was struggling in his other classes. The pressure to maintain his scholarship weighed heavily on him. Sensing his distress, Evelyn made her first overt move. After a particularly long office meeting, she placed her hand on Zane's arm and spoke softly. "I see so much potential in you, Zane. I'd hate to see it go to waste because of a few difficult classes. Perhaps we could work out an arrangement to ensure your success." Zane, naive and desperate to prove himself, failed to recognize the dangerous territory he was entering. He interpreted Evelyn's offer as a lifeline, a chance to focus on his true passion without the fear of losing his scholarship. As autumn painted the Briarcliff campus in shades of gold and red, Evelyn and Zane's relationship intensified. She invited him to exclusive literary events, introducing him to her colleagues as a promising protégé. Zane, intoxicated by this new world of intellectual stimulation and perceived belonging, began to rely on Evelyn for more than just academic guidance. Evelyn, for her part, reveled in Zane's dependence. She carefully crafted every interaction to deepen his emotional attachment while maintaining plausible deniability. To her colleagues, she was merely nurturing a gifted student. To Zane, she became the center of his world. By the time the fall semester was coming to a close, the boundaries between mentor and student had become irrevocably blurred. Zane's writing, once filled with diverse influences, now mimicked Evelyn's style and preferences. His social circle had shrunk, with more and more of his time devoted to extra study sessions with Dr. Gosling. Neither Zane nor Evelyn fully realized the dangerous web they were weaving. As the winter break approached, their relationship teetered on the brink of a precipice, ready to plunge into depths from which there would be no return. The winter break marked a critical turning point in Evelyn and Zane's relationship. With the campus largely deserted, they found themselves drawn into a vortex of intensifying emotions and crossed boundaries. Evelyn, under the guise of providing additional mentorship, invited Zane to her off-campus apartment to discuss his final paper for her class. The evening began innocently enough, with Evelyn serving tea and engaging Zane in a heated debate about postmodern literature. But as the hours wore on and inhibitions lowered, the atmosphere shifted. Evelyn, her voice lowered to a near whisper, began to share personal stories of her own struggles as a young academic. She portrayed herself as a misunderstood genius, persecuted by jealous colleagues, and bound by the rigid structures of academia. Zane, already in awe of Evelyn's intellect, found himself drawn deeper into her world. He saw in her a kindred spirit, someone who truly understood the artist's struggle. When Evelyn's hand brushed against his, the electric charge between them was undeniable. What happened next would be a point of contention in the later investigation. Evelyn claimed that Zane initiated the kiss, overcome by youthful passion. Zane, in his final statement, insisted that Evelyn had orchestrated the entire evening to this end. Regardless of who made the first move, that night marked the beginning of a physical relationship that would have devastating consequences. As the new semester began, Evelyn and Zane's secret affair intensified. Clandestine meetings in her office turned into long weekends at secluded bed and breakfasts. Evelyn showered Zane with gifts: rare books, expensive pens, a laptop to replace his outdated model. She framed each gift as an investment in his future as a writer, further binding him to her. Zane's grades, which had been middling in his other classes, suddenly skyrocketed. Evelyn used her influence to intervene on his behalf with other professors, painting him as a misunderstood genius who simply needed the right guidance. She promised Zane that with her help, he could secure a spot in a prestigious MFA program, bypassing the usual requirements. But as Zane's dependence on Evelyn grew, so did his anxiety. The initial thrill of their forbidden romance began to give way to guilt and fear of discovery. His writing, once vibrant and unique, became a pale imitation of Evelyn's style. His few remaining friends noticed his increasing isolation and erratic behavior. Evelyn, sensing Zane's unease, doubled down on her manipulation. She alternated between lavish praise and cruel criticism, keeping Zane in a constant state of emotional turmoil. She convinced him that their relationship was special, a meeting of twin souls that the ordinary world could never understand. In a particularly chilling move, Evelyn began to insinuate that Zane's success was entirely dependent on her goodwill. During one tense encounter in her office, she casually remarked, "It would be a shame if the ethics board were to investigate the sudden improvement in your grades. They might get the wrong idea about how you've been earning them." The implied threat was clear. Zane, trapped between his ambition and his growing sense of moral unease, began to withdraw into himself. His journal entries from this period, later recovered by investigators, paint a picture of a young man in deep emotional distress. February 15th, "I don't know who I am anymore. Everything I've achieved feels tainted. But how can something so wrong feel so necessary?" March 3rd, "E says she's the only one who truly understands me. Maybe she's right. The thought of losing her terrifies me more than anything." As spring bloomed on the Briarcliff campus, the web of lies and manipulation had grown so thick that Zane could scarcely remember his life before Evelyn. His family, worried by his increasingly infrequent calls home, planned a surprise visit. Evelyn, paranoid about discovery, forced Zane to rebuff them, causing a painful rift. It was during this time that Zane began to confide in his roommate, Trevor. While he didn't reveal the full extent of his relationship with Evelyn, he shared enough for Trevor to become deeply concerned. Trevor's worried glances and pointed questions about Zane's relationship with Dr. Gosling would later prove to be the thread that would begin to unravel the whole sordid affair. As the semester neared its end, the pressure on both Evelyn and Zane intensified. Their relationship, built on a foundation of manipulation and false promises, was beginning to crack under the weight of its own contradictions. Neither could have predicted the violent culmination that lay just around the corner, a tragic end to a romance that should never have begun. The catalyst for the tragic events that followed came in the form of a seemingly innocuous email. Dr. Fiona Sullivan, the Dean of Liberal Arts, reached out to Evelyn about Zane's remarkable academic turnaround, expressing interest in featuring him in a college newsletter. For Evelyn, this well-intentioned inquiry set off alarm bells. The thought of increased scrutiny on Zane's achievements filled her with panic. In a frenzy, Evelyn called Zane to her office after hours. The tension was palpable as she paced the room, outlining the danger they were in. Zane, already worn down by months of emotional manipulation, felt the last vestiges of his self-worth crumbling. It was in this charged atmosphere that Zane finally found the courage to confront the reality of their situation. His voice barely above a whisper, he said, "This isn't right, Evelyn. What we're doing is destroying me." Evelyn's reaction was swift and cruel. Her nurturing facade cracked, revealing the ruthless manipulator beneath. She reminded Zane of all she had done for him, how his success was entirely due to her influence. In a chilling moment, she asked, "Do you really think you'd be anything without me? You're nothing but a small-town boy with delusions of grandeur. I made you." Zane, his eyes open to the toxic nature of their relationship, felt a surge of anger and self-preservation. He shot back, "This ends now. I'm going to tell the dean everything." The color drained from Evelyn's face. Her carefully constructed world teetered on the brink of collapse. In a last-ditch effort to maintain control, she alternated between threats and pleas, reminding Zane of the consequences they would both face if the truth came to light. But something had shifted in Zane. The fog of infatuation and manipulation had lifted, revealing the stark reality of his situation. He turned to leave, his hand on the doorknob, when Evelyn's voice, now ice-cold, stopped him. "If you walk out that door, I'll make sure you never write again." Zane paused, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Then, without turning back, he walked out, leaving Evelyn alone with the ruins of her twisted fantasy. The following days were a blur for both Zane and Evelyn. Zane, emboldened by his decision, confided the full extent of the affair to his roommate Trevor. Together, they decided to approach Dean Sullivan with the truth. Evelyn, meanwhile, spiraled into panic. She alternated between desperate attempts to contact Zane and frantic efforts to cover her tracks. She deleted emails, shredded documents, and called in favors from colleagues to vouch for her character. As Zane prepared to meet with the dean, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Evelyn's threats echoed in his mind, but he was determined to reclaim his life and his integrity. Little did he know that Evelyn, driven to the brink by the imminent exposure of her crimes, was formulating a desperate and deadly plan to silence him forever. On the night of the murder, Zane Holloway left the library just after midnight, his mind preoccupied with the meeting he had scheduled with Dean Sullivan the following morning. As he walked along the deserted path that skirted the lake, he failed to notice the figure emerging from the shadows behind him. Evelyn Gosling had spent the day in a state of frenzied planning. Her rational mind had been overwhelmed by a toxic mix of fear, rage, and desperation. In her distorted reality, silencing Zane had become the only way to preserve the life she had built. She had waited for hours, watching the library entrance, a large rock clutched in her trembling hands. As Zane approached a secluded bend in the path, Evelyn made her move. The first blow caught Zane by surprise, sending him stumbling forward. He turned, shock and betrayal etched on his face as he recognized his attacker. "Evelyn, I trusted you," he gasped. But Evelyn was beyond reason. With a strength born of desperation, with a rock in her hand, she struck again and again while he was on the ground. Zane's attempts to defend himself were weakened by his reluctance to hurt the woman he had once admired and loved. In the aftermath of her violent act, Evelyn stood frozen, the reality of what she had done crashing over her. The fog seemed to close in, muffling the sound of Zane's body as it slid down the embankment into the dark waters of the lake. With mechanical efficiency, Evelyn began to cover her tracks. She gathered Zane's scattered belongings, wiping them clean of fingerprints before tossing them into the water. She scoured the area for any evidence that might link her to the scene. As the first light of dawn began to break through the mist, Evelyn made her way back to her apartment, her clothes sodden and muddied. Over the next few days, Evelyn attempted to maintain a facade of normalcy. She taught her classes, attended faculty meetings, all while battling the internal chaos of her guilt and fear. When Zane was reported missing, she feigned concern, even joining search parties organized by the college. But the weight of her actions took its toll. Colleagues noted her distracted demeanor and uncharacteristic nervousness. A psychology professor who had known Evelyn for years later recalled, "There was a wildness in her eyes, a tension in her movements. It was as if she was constantly on the verge of flight." Evelyn's carefully constructed alibi began to unravel almost immediately. The rock she had used as a weapon, hastily discarded in the dumpster behind her apartment building, was discovered by a maintenance worker. Security camera footage placed her car near the lake on the night of Zane's disappearance, contradicting her claim of being home all night. As the investigation intensified, Evelyn's paranoia reached new heights. She became convinced that everyone knew her secret. In a moment of panic, she attempted to flee, hastily packing a bag and withdrawing large sums of cash from her bank account. It was this erratic behavior that ultimately led to her undoing. Zane's body, weighed down by rocks, was discovered by a group of students on a weekend fishing trip. The grim discovery sent shockwaves through the Briarcliff community and marked the beginning of the end for Evelyn Gosling. The discovery of Zane Holloway's body transformed the missing person case into a full-blown homicide investigation. Detective Samantha Reeves, a veteran of the Briarcliff Police Department, took charge of the case. Her first steps were to secure the crime scene and order a comprehensive forensic analysis of the area surrounding Lake Briarcliff. The autopsy revealed that Zane had died from blunt force trauma to the head, with drowning as a secondary cause of death. The medical examiner noted defensive wounds on Zane's arms, indicating he had tried to protect himself from his attacker. As news of the murder spread, the idyllic campus of Briarcliff Community College became a hotbed of speculation and fear. Students whispered in hallways, casting suspicious glances at their peers and professors. The administration, desperate to control the narrative, held conferences assuring parents and the community that this was an isolated incident. Detective Reeves and her team began the painstaking process of interviewing Zane's friends, family, and associates. It was during these initial interviews that Zane's roommate, Trevor Lawson, provided the first crucial lead. Trevor revealed Zane's troubled relationship with Professor Gosling, including vague references to an arrangement that had left Zane increasingly distressed in the weeks leading up to his disappearance. This information led investigators to take a closer look at Evelyn Gosling. On the surface, she appeared to be a grieving mentor, distraught over the loss of a promising student. However, as detectives dug deeper, inconsistencies in her story began to emerge. A breakthrough came when forensic analysts discovered traces of soil on the rock used to attack Zane that matched samples from Evelyn's garden. Additionally, security footage from a gas station near Lake Briarcliff showed Evelyn's car in the area on the night of the murder, contradicting her alibi. As the evidence mounted, Evelyn's colleagues began to come forward with their own observations. A professor from the psychology department recalled a disturbing conversation with Evelyn just days before Zane's disappearance. She seemed agitated, he told investigators. She kept talking about how she couldn't let everything she'd worked for be destroyed by a misunderstanding. The investigation took another turn when detectives uncovered a series of emails between Evelyn and Zane. While carefully worded, the subtext of these messages hinted at an inappropriate relationship. IT specialists recovered deleted drafts of emails from Evelyn's college account that were far more explicit, detailing her manipulation of Zane and her fears of exposure. The search of Evelyn's apartment yielded damning evidence. Hidden in a locked drawer, detectives found Zane's journal, which detailed the evolution of their relationship and his growing desire to end it. With the wealth of physical evidence and witness testimony, the district attorney's office felt confident in charging Evelyn Gosling with first-degree murder. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community, shattering the image of the brilliant, dedicated professor and exposing the dark underbelly of power dynamics in academia. As Evelyn was led away in handcuffs, the true scope of her deception began to unravel, leaving the Briarcliff community to grapple with the question of how such a predator had hidden in plain sight for so long. Over the next several hours, Evelyn's full confession emerged, painting a disturbing picture of manipulation, abuse of power, and ultimately, murder. She spoke of her initial attraction to Zane's talent and vulnerability, how easy it had been to shape him to her will, her voice filled with bitterness as she recounted Zane's decision to expose their relationship, describing it as a betrayal that left her no option but to silence him permanently. The trial of Evelyn Gosling was brief but intense. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence, from forensic analysis to Evelyn's own confession. Despite a vigorous defense attempting to paint her as a victim of her own mental illness, the jury took only 6 hours to return a guilty verdict on all counts. The judge, her voice heavy with the weight of the moment, sentenced Evelyn to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The aftermath of the trial saw significant changes at Briarcliff Community College. The administration implemented strict new guidelines governing faculty-student interactions, and mandatory training on recognizing and reporting inappropriate behavior was instituted. As Briarcliff slowly began to heal, the tragedy left an indelible mark on the community. The shores of Lake Briarcliff, once a place of tranquility and reflection, now stood as a somber reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind the most respectable facades, and the tragic consequences when trust is abused and power is unchecked. On October 15, 2021, police responded to a distress call from an apartment complex on Oak Street. What they discovered inside would haunt them for years to come: the lifeless body of 32-year-old Ethan Reed, a beloved local high school teacher, lying in a pool of his own blood. The prime suspect? His girlfriend of 2 years, 29-year-old software engineer Olivia Rogan. As investigators delved deeper into the case, they uncovered a disturbing web of surveillance, manipulation, and escalating control that had ensnared Ethan in the months leading up to his death. Hidden cameras, meticulously placed throughout his apartment, told a silent tale of paranoia and obsession. Olivia Rogan's path to becoming the central figure in a tragic true crime story began long before she met Ethan Reed. Born in 1993 to Margaret and James Rogan, Olivia grew up in a middle-class suburb of Portland. From an early age, those close to the family noted Olivia's intense need for attention and validation. Margaret Rogan, in an interview following her daughter's arrest, reflected on Olivia's childhood. She was an exceptionally bright child, always at the top of her class, but she struggled to form lasting friendships. Margaret recalled, "I thought it was just shyness at first, but as she got older I noticed how possessive she could be of the few friends she did make. If they spent time with other children, Olivia would become sullen and withdrawn." This pattern continued into Olivia's teenage years. Her high school boyfriend, Alex Chen, later told investigators about Olivia's constant need to know his whereabouts. "She would call or text incessantly when we weren't together," he said. "If I didn't respond quickly enough, she'd show up wherever she thought I might be. At the time, I thought it was just because she cared so much." Despite these interpersonal challenges, Olivia excelled academically. She graduated as valedictorian of her high school class and went on to study computer science at Stanford University. It was here that Olivia's controlling tendencies found a new outlet in the world of technology. Her college roommate, Sarah Jennings, remembered Olivia's fascination with coding and surveillance software. "She was brilliant at it," Sarah said, "but sometimes it felt like she was using her skills to keep tabs on everyone around her. She'd casually mention things about our classmates that she couldn't possibly have known without some kind of digital snooping." After graduating with honors, Olivia landed a prestigious job at a tech startup. Her colleagues described her as driven and meticulous, often working long hours to perfect her code. However, her personal life continued to be marked by tumultuous, short-lived relationships. Jason Tran, who dated Olivia for 6 months in 2019, described the relationship as intense and suffocating. "She wanted to know everything about my day, my thoughts, my plans," he said. "When I tried to set boundaries, she'd become angry or manipulative. It was exhausting." By the time Olivia moved back to Ashland in early 2020, accepting a remote position with her company, she had left a trail of broken relationships behind her. Yet those who knew her couldn't have predicted the dark turn her life would take when she met Ethan Reed. Ethan Reed's life stood in stark contrast to Olivia's tumultuous journey. Born in 1990 in Ashland, Ethan was the youngest of 3 children in a close-knit family. His older sister, Amanda Reed, described their childhood as idyllic. "We grew up surrounded by nature, spending our summers hiking in the mountains and our winters skiing. Ethan was always the peacemaker, the one who could make anyone laugh. From an early age, Ethan showed a passion for learning and a natural ability to connect with others. His high school English teacher, Mrs. Elaine Hoffman, remembered him fondly. Ethan had a way of bringing out the best in his classmates. He was patient, kind, and had an infectious enthusiasm for literature. I always thought he'd make an excellent teacher someday." Mrs. Hoffman's prediction proved accurate. After graduating from the university with a degree in English literature, Ethan returned to his hometown to teach at Ashland High School. Ethan's personal life was characterized by steady, long-term relationships. His college girlfriend, Laura Simmons, remained a close friend even after their amicable breakup. "Ethan was always so balanced," she said. "He valued his independence, but was also incredibly loyal and supportive. We broke up because our career paths were taking us in different directions, but there was never any drama." The fateful meeting between Olivia Rogan and Ethan Reed occurred on a sunny Saturday afternoon in May 2020 at a local farmer's market. Olivia, still adjusting to life, had ventured out to explore her new surroundings. Ethan, a regular at the market, was picking up fresh produce for the week. Their eyes met across a display of organic apples, and Ethan, ever the friendly local, struck up a conversation about the best varieties for baking. Olivia, charmed by his easygoing nature and warm smile, found herself lingering at the stall far longer than she'd intended. As they chatted, they discovered a shared love of classic literature and hiking. Ethan, impressed by Olivia's quick wit and intelligence, suggested they meet up for a hike the following weekend. Olivia, feeling an instant connection, eagerly agreed. Their first date was a hike up to Grizzly Peak, offering breathtaking views of the Rogue Valley. Ethan's friend Mark later recalled, "Ethan came back from that hike on cloud 9. He couldn't stop talking about how smart and funny Olivia was, how they'd talked for hours without a lull in the conversation." Over the next few weeks, Olivia and Ethan's relationship blossomed rapidly. They spent long evenings discussing books, sharing meals, and exploring the natural beauty of southern area. To those around them, they seemed like a perfect match. However, even in these early honeymoon days of their relationship, there were subtle signs of Olivia's possessive nature. Ethan's sister Amanda noticed that Olivia seemed to monopolize his time. She'd call or text constantly when they weren't together, and she always seemed to have a reason why Ethan couldn't join family gatherings without her. Ethan, blinded by the excitement of new love, brushed off these early red flags. When his friend Mark expressed concern about the intensity of the relationship, Ethan laughed it off. "She's just excited about us," he said. "It'll calm down once we're more settled." Little did Ethan know that this was just the beginning of a pattern that would gradually tighten around him, slowly cutting him off from the life he had built and the people who cared about him most. By the fall of 2020, Olivia had all but moved into Ethan's apartment. Despite him never officially asking her to live with him, she began to exert influence over every aspect of his daily life, from what he ate to how he spent his free time. Ethan's colleague and friend, fellow English teacher Jessica Lawson, noticed changes in his behavior at work. He started turning down invitations to after-school happy hours, something he'd always enjoyed before. When I asked him about it, he said Olivia wasn't comfortable with him being out late, Jessica recalled. It seemed odd, given that she knew most of us and had even joined us a few times. Olivia's control extended to Ethan's social media presence. Friends noticed that his usually active Facebook and Instagram accounts became sparse, with posts becoming infrequent and impersonal. When questioned, Ethan would brush it off, saying he was trying to be more private online. But it was Olivia's attempts to isolate Ethan from his family that raised the most alarm bells. Amanda Reed remembered a particularly disturbing incident during the 2020 holiday season. "We always have a big family Christmas at our parents' house," she said. For that year, Ethan called at the last minute to say he and Olivia couldn't make it. When I pressed him, he said Olivia wasn't feeling well and he needed to stay with her. but I could hear her in the background, sounding perfectly fine. Olivia employed a variety of emotional manipulation tactics to maintain her grip on Ethan. She would oscillate between lavishing him with affection and subjecting him to cold, silent treatments if he didn't comply with her wishes. Ethan's friend Mark recounted a camping trip they had planned for months. The night before we were supposed to leave, Ethan called to cancel. He sounded so defeated. He said Olivia was upset he was going away without her, even though she'd been invited and had declined. As 2021 progressed, Olivia's behavior became more erratic. She began accusing Ethan of infidelity. Despite having no evidence to support her claims, she would show up unannounced at the high school, ostensibly to bring Ethan lunch. But colleagues noted how she seemed to be scanning the room, as if looking for signs of inappropriate behavior. Ethan's student Emma Chen later testified to a disturbing encounter. Ms. Rogan came into our classroom during lunch break. Mr. Reed wasn't there, but she stayed anyway, asking us questions about him. It felt really weird and invasive. Despite the mounting evidence of Olivia's controlling behavior, Ethan remained committed to the relationship. Those close to him noted his increasing stress and anxiety, but he would deflect their concerns, often making excuses for Olivia's actions. His sister Amanda confronted him directly in the summer of 2021. I told him I was worried that this didn't seem like a healthy relationship, she said. But he just got defensive. He said I didn't understand Olivia, that she'd been hurt in the past and needed extra reassurance. He truly believed he could help her overcome her insecurities. As Olivia's paranoia and need for control reached new heights, she made a decision that would irreversibly alter the course of her relationship with Ethan and ultimately lead to its tragic conclusion. In late August 2021, while Ethan was away at a weekend teaching conference, Olivia took the drastic step of installing hidden cameras throughout his apartment. The idea had been brewing in Olivia's mind for weeks. Her background in software engineering made the technical aspects of the plan feasible, and her growing suspicions about Ethan's fidelity provided the justification she needed to overcome any moral qualms. Olivia meticulously planned the operation, purchasing small high-definition cameras disguised as everyday objects, a smoke detector, a phone charger, even a potted plant. She also set up sophisticated software that would allow her to access the feeds remotely from her laptop or phone. On the Friday afternoon that Ethan left for his conference, Olivia sprang into action. She had a key to his apartment, ostensibly for emergencies, which gave her unfettered access. Over the next several hours, she carefully placed cameras in the living room, kitchen, bedroom, and even the bathroom, ensuring every corner of Ethan's private space was under surveillance. With the cameras in place and the software running smoothly, Olivia left the apartment, her heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and guilt. She told herself that this was a necessary step, that it would allay her fears and allow her to trust Ethan completely. The first few days of monitoring proved uneventful. Olivia watched as Ethan went about his daily routines, grading papers, preparing lessons, chatting on the phone with his sister. But rather than easing her suspicions, the lack of incriminating evidence only fueled Olivia's paranoia. She began to obsess over minor details. Why did Ethan smile at that text message? Who was he waving to out the window? Olivia's colleague, David Cho, later recalled noticing changes in her behavior at work during this time. She seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone. I caught a glimpse of her screen once. It looked like a video feed, but she quickly closed it when she saw me looking. As the days turned into weeks, Olivia's obsession with the camera feeds grew. She began neglecting her work, her sleep suffered, and her interactions with Ethan became increasingly strained as she struggled to keep her secret. One evening, while reaching for a book on his shelf, Ethan noticed that several volumes were slightly out of place. He distinctly remembered organizing them just days before. In the bathroom, his toiletries seemed rearranged, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly how. More unsettling were the times he felt as if he was being watched. He'd be grading papers in the living room and suddenly feel a prickle on the back of his neck, as if someone's eyes were on him. But when he looked up, he was alone. Ethan's friend and fellow teacher, Jessica Lawson, recalled a conversation they had during this period. He mentioned feeling on edge in his own home, she said. He laughed it off, saying he was probably just stressed about work, but I could tell it was really bothering him. Olivia's behavior added to Ethan's growing discomfort. She began making comments about his daily activities that she shouldn't have known about. Once, she mentioned in passing that she liked the new brand of coffee he'd bought, despite not having been to his apartment in days. Another time, she asked about a phone call he'd had with his mother, though he was certain he hadn't mentioned it to her. When Ethan would express confusion about these slip-ups, Olivia would quickly change the subject or provide vague explanations. He must have mentioned the coffee in passing, she'd say, or perhaps his mother had told her about the call. As his unease grew, Ethan found himself second-guessing his own memories and perceptions. Am I just being paranoid? He wondered. Is the stress of work getting to me? Despite his attempts to rationalize the strange occurrences, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. He began to pay closer attention to his surroundings, noting any changes or oddities in his apartment. He even considered confiding in his sister Amanda, but hesitated, worried that his suspicions might sound absurd or that he might be overreacting. The moment of revelation came on an October evening in 2021. Ethan had been grading papers late into the night, the soft glow of his laptop illuminating the living room. As he stretched and prepared to call it a night, his elbow knocked a small potted plant off the side table. The pot shattered on the hardwood floor, soil and ceramic shards scattering across the room. As Ethan knelt to clean up the mess, something caught his eye amidst the debris. A tiny lens, no bigger than a pencil eraser, glinted in the low light. His heart racing, Ethan carefully extracted the object from the soil. It was a miniature camera, expertly concealed within the plant's base. The discovery sent a chill down Ethan's spine. With trembling hands, he began a frantic search of his apartment. Over the next hour, he uncovered 5 more hidden cameras. In the smoke detector, a picture frame, even the shower head. The realization that his most private moments had been under surveillance was overwhelming. Ethan's mind reeled as he pieced together the implications. The strange comments Olivia had made, her uncanny knowledge of his daily activities, the feeling of being watched, it all suddenly made horrifying sense. The woman he had loved and trusted had violated his privacy in the most intimate way possible. In a daze, Ethan called the one person he knew he could trust implicitly, his sister Amanda. It was past midnight, but she answered on the second ring, immediately alert at the sound of distress in her brother's voice. "Ethan, what's wrong?" she asked, concern evident in her tone. Through a voice choked with emotion, Ethan recounted his discovery. Amanda listened in shocked silence, her initial disbelief quickly turning to anger on her brother's behalf. As Ethan's story unfolded, Amanda's protective instincts kicked in. "You need to get out of there," she insisted. "Pack a bag and come to my place. We'll figure this out together." But Ethan was torn. Part of him wanted to confront Olivia immediately, to demand answers and explanations. Another part was simply numb with betrayal, struggling to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with someone capable of such a gross invasion of privacy. In the end, it was Amanda's steady voice that guided his next actions. "Document everything," she advised. "Take pictures of the cameras. Save any recordings you can find. We'll go to the police in the morning." As the first light of dawn broke over Ashland, Ethan sat on his couch, surrounded by the dismantled remains of Olivia's surveillance network. His phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Good morning, babe. Sleep well?" The irony of her feigned normalcy was not lost on Ethan. With a deep breath, he typed out a response that would set in motion the final tragic act of their relationship. "We need to talk. Come over as soon as you can." The tension in Ethan's apartment was palpable as Olivia arrived later that morning. She entered with her usual smile, leaning in for a kiss, but froze when she saw Ethan's grim expression and the array of dismantled cameras on the coffee table. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then Olivia's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. "Ethan, I can explain," she began, her voice quavering. But Ethan, his voice low and controlled, cut her off. He spoke of trust betrayed, of the sanctity of privacy violated. With each word, Olivia seemed to shrink, her usual confidence evaporating in the face of her exposed deception. When Ethan finally fell silent, Olivia launched into a desperate justification of her actions. She spoke of her deep-seated insecurities, her fear of losing him, her conviction that if she could just prove to herself that he was faithful, she could finally relax into their relationship. Her words came out in a rush, pleading and explanatory. But Ethan remained unmoved. "I can't be with someone who would do this," he said firmly. "We're done, Olivia. I want you to leave." Olivia's demeanor changed in an instant. Her tears dried up, replaced by a cold, hard look. "You can't do this to me," she hissed. "We're perfect together. You're overreacting." As Ethan stood firm in his decision, Olivia's pleas turned to threats. She spoke of ruining his career, of telling his students and colleagues about embarrassing moments she'd captured on camera. When these threats failed to sway Ethan, she resorted to emotional manipulation, threatening self-harm if he left her. Throughout it all, Ethan remained resolute. Even as his heart broke at the sight of Olivia's desperation, he knew with a clarity that surprised him that there was no coming back from this betrayal. Finally, seeing that her words were having no effect, Olivia stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door behind her. Ethan sank onto the couch, emotionally exhausted. He thought the worst was over. He had no idea that Olivia's desperation was about to take a far more dangerous turn. The events of October 15th, 2021, would forever be etched in the memories of Ashland's residents. The day began like any other, with no indication of the tragedy that would unfold. Ethan, emotionally drained from the confrontation with Olivia, had called in sick to work. He spent the morning talking with his sister Amanda, making plans to file a police report about the hidden cameras. As evening approached, he decided to take a walk to clear his head, leaving his phone behind to avoid any desperate messages from Olivia. It was during this absence that Olivia made her final fatal return to Ethan's apartment. Neighbors would later report seeing her enter the building, her face set in a mask of determination. She used her key to let herself in, her mind racing with a mix of anger, desperation, and a twisted sense of righteous indignation. When Ethan returned home around 7 p.m., he found Olivia waiting for him in the darkened living room. The sight of her there, uninvited and unexpected, sent a jolt of fear through him. "Olivia, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice wary. Olivia's response was chilling in its calmness. "We're going to fix this, Ethan," she said. "You'll see that we belong together." What followed was a heated argument that quickly spiraled out of control. Olivia vacillated between pleading for another chance and lashing out with bitter accusations. Ethan, his patience exhausted, demanded that she leave immediately. It was then that Olivia's fragile control snapped. In a move that would shock even those who knew of her obsessive tendencies, she produced a kitchen knife she had taken from Ethan's own drawer. The next few moments were a blur of violence and terror. Ethan, caught off guard by the sudden escalation, tried to reason with Olivia, even as he backed away from the blade. But Olivia, beyond the reach of reason, lunged forward. In the struggle that ensued, Ethan's training as a former high school wrestler came into play. He managed to grapple with Olivia, trying to disarm her without causing harm. But in her frenzied state, Olivia's strength seemed superhuman. Neighbors would later report hearing shouts and the sound of breaking glass. One, concerned by the commotion, called 911, but help would arrive too late. By the time police broke down the door of Ethan's apartment, the tragic scene had already played out to its grim conclusion. They found Ethan on the floor with multiple stab wounds marking his body, the life already fading from his eyes. Olivia sat beside him, the bloody knife still clutched in her hand, her gaze vacant as she stared at what she had done. As paramedics rushed in, futilely attempting to save Ethan's life, Olivia offered no resistance when the police took her into custody. Her only words, repeated over and over like a mantra, were, "He was supposed to love me forever." The investigation, led by Detective Sarah Nguyen of the Ashland Police Department, quickly uncovered the full extent of Olivia's surveillance operation, revealing months of invasive monitoring. This digital trail, along with physical evidence from the crime scene and witness statements, painted a damning picture of obsession and premeditated violence. Ethan's family and friends were devastated. His sister Amanda in particular struggled with guilt. "I knew something was wrong," she said in a tearful interview. "I should have pushed harder, done more to get him away from her." As the investigation progressed, more details of Olivia's troubled past came to light. Former colleagues and ex-boyfriends came forward with stories of her controlling behavior and emotional manipulation. Her parents, shell-shocked by their daughter's actions, could only offer tearful apologies to Ethan's family. The district attorney presented a methodical case, walking the jury through the progression of Olivia's obsessive behavior. The recovered surveillance footage played a central role, starkly illustrating the invasion of Ethan's privacy. The defense didn't contest the basic facts of the case. Instead, they focused on Olivia's mental state, bringing in expert witnesses to testify about her history of attachment issues and borderline personality disorder. They argued that Olivia's actions were the result of a mental health crisis, not premeditated murder. Olivia herself took the stand, her testimony an unsettling mixture of remorse and rationalization. She spoke of her deep love for Ethan and her fear of abandonment, claiming that she never meant to hurt him. Her apparent lack of full comprehension of the gravity of her actions left many in the courtroom disturbed. After a 2-week trial and 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict on charges of first-degree murder. At the sentencing hearing, the judge delivered a scathing indictment of Olivia's actions before sentencing her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Ashlyn slowly healed, the community was left to reflect on the nature of love, trust, and the human capacity for both compassion and cruelty. The case would be remembered not just for its shocking conclusion, but as a catalyst for change and a somber reminder of the importance of recognizing and addressing toxic relationship dynamics before they escalate to tragedy. At the center of this storm were 3 individuals whose lives would become inextricably entangled. Thaddeus Bracey, a 32-year-old personal trainer with a body chiseled from marble, had built a reputation as the go-to fitness guru. Among his newest clients was Julia Ashworth, a 45-year-old socialite known for her impeccable taste. Julia was the very picture of suburban success, intelligent, beautiful, and married to Luke Ashworth, a 50-year-old real estate mogul whose name graced half the commercial buildings in the nearby city. The Ashworths were the golden couple of Oak Ridge Heights. Their sprawling Georgian-style mansion hosted the most coveted parties, and their philanthropic efforts made headlines in the local press. To the outside world, they embodied the American dream: successful, charitable, and deeply in love. But as with many stories that begin in seeming perfection, cracks were forming in the foundation of the Ashworths' world. These fissures would provide the perfect entry point for Thaddeus Bracey, a man whose own past was shrouded in mystery and marked by a determination to rise above his humble beginnings. Little did anyone know that the arrival of Thaddeus in the Ashworths' lives would set in motion a chain of events that would lead to passion, betrayal, and ultimately, a confrontation that would leave the community reeling and one person dead. Thaddeus Bracey's journey to becoming Oak Ridge Heights' most sought-after personal trainer was far from smooth. Born in a struggling neighborhood of Detroit, Thaddeus grew up in a world where survival often trumped ambition. His father, a factory worker, died when Thaddeus was just 10, leaving his mother to raise him and his 2 younger sisters on a meager salary. From an early age, Thaddeus found solace and strength in physical fitness. The local community center became his second home, where he spent countless hours lifting weights and running on old treadmills. It was here that he first dreamed of a life beyond the confines of his neighborhood. At 18, Thaddeus enlisted in the Army, seeing it as his ticket out. During his 4-year service, he honed his body and mind, earning accolades for his physical prowess and leadership skills. However, his military career came to an abrupt end when he was honorably discharged following a controversial incident involving a superior officer, the details of which Thaddeus never fully disclosed. Upon returning to civilian life, Thaddeus leveraged his military experience and physical conditioning into a career as a personal trainer. He started small, working at budget gyms and taking on any client he could find. His dedication, combined with his natural charisma, soon earned him a devoted following. 5 years before the events that would change everything, Thaddeus made the calculated decision to move to Oak Ridge Heights. He saw the affluent suburb as fertile ground for his ambitions, a place where his skills could command premium prices. Within 2 years, he had established himself as the trainer to the stars, his past struggles hidden behind a veneer of success and confidence. Luke and Julia Ashworth's marriage was the stuff of local legend. They had met 20 years earlier at a charity auction, where Luke, already a rising star in real estate, had outbid everyone for a date with Julia, then a recent college graduate working in public relations. Their whirlwind romance culminated in a lavish wedding just 6 months later, covered extensively by the local media. For the first decade of their marriage, Luke and Julia seemed to have it all. Luke's business acumen led to the rapid expansion of his real estate empire, while Julia's social skills and philanthropic efforts made them the darlings of Oak Ridge Heights high society. They traveled the world, donated generously to local causes, and hosted events that were the talk of the town. However, As the years wore on, subtle tensions began to emerge. Luke's workaholic tendencies meant he was often absent, leaving Julia to manage their social life and household alone. Their inability to conceive a child, despite years of trying and expensive fertility treatments, added strain to their relationship. To the outside world, the Ashworths maintained a united front. They still attended events arm in arm, smiling for cameras and exchanging loving glances. But behind closed doors, silence and resentment were becoming more common than intimate conversations. Julia threw herself into her charity work and social engagements, while Luke spent increasingly long hours at the office. By the time Thaddeus entered their lives, the Ashworths' marriage was a beautifully crafted facade, hiding a growing emotional distance that neither was fully ready to acknowledge. The fateful first encounter between Thaddeus and Luke occurred at the Oak Ridge Heights Country Club, where Julia had begun taking personal training sessions with Thaddeus. Luke, finishing a round of golf, happened upon them as Thaddeus was demonstrating a stretch to Julia. Luke's eyes were immediately drawn to Thaddeus's physique, a fact he would later struggle to admit to himself. Thaddeus, ever the professional, greeted Luke with his trademark winning smile and a firm handshake that lingered a moment too long. As Julia enthusiastically praised Thaddeus's skills as a trainer, Luke found himself captivated by the younger man's confidence and easy charm. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, touching on fitness, business, and their shared love of vintage cars. Before parting ways, Luke surprised himself by expressing interest in personal training sessions. Thaddeus, sensing an opportunity, suggested a trial session at the Ashworth home gym. As Luke watched Thaddeus walk away, he felt a flutter of excitement he hadn't experienced in years. For his part, Thaddeus knew he had made an impression on the powerful Mr. Ashworth, an impression he was determined to capitalize on, both professionally and personally. The first private training session between Thaddeus and Luke took place on a crisp, autumn morning in the Ashworth state-of-the-art home gym. Julia had left early for a charity board meeting, leaving the two men alone in the sprawling mansion. As Thaddeus guided Luke through a series of exercises, the sexual tension between them was palpable. Luke found himself hyper-aware of Thaddeus's touch as the trainer adjusted his form. Their eyes met in the mirror, lingering longer than necessary. Thaddeus, sensing Luke's interest, subtly increased the intimacy of his instructions, his hands ghosting over Luke's body under the guise of professional guidance. By the end of the session, both men were breathless, and not just from the physical exertion. As Luke toweled off, Thaddeus made his move. He complimented Luke's physique, noting how responsive his body was to instruction. The innuendo was clear, and Luke, his defenses lowered by endorphins and long-suppressed desire, didn't resist when Thaddeus leaned in for a kiss. What followed was a passionate encounter that left both men exhilarated and conflicted. For Luke, it was a revelation, a chance to explore feelings he had long buried beneath his heterosexual marriage and public persona. For Thaddeus, it was a mixture of genuine attraction and calculated risk, knowing that an affair with Luke could either elevate or destroy his carefully constructed life in Oak Ridge Heights. In the aftermath, as they lay catching their breath on the gym floor, reality began to seep back in. Luke, guilt washing over him, started to stammer out apologies and excuses. Thaddeus, ever the smooth operator, reassured him. This could be their secret, he suggested. No one needed to know. They were both adults, both seeking something their current lives couldn't provide. Why not indulge? Luke, torn between his loyalty to Julia and his newfound passion, ultimately agreed to continue the affair. They set ground rules. Discretion was paramount, and their encounters would be limited to training sessions when Julia was away. Over the next few months, Thaddeus and Luke's affair intensified. What started as purely physical quickly developed emotional undertones. Luke found himself opening up to Thaddeus about his frustrations with work and his marriage in a way he never had with anyone else. Thaddeus, in turn, shared carefully curated stories from his past, painting himself as a sensitive soul beneath his confident exterior. Their rendezvous became more frequent and daring. Quick encounters in the home gym expanded to steamy sessions in high-end hotel rooms and secluded spots around Oak Ridge Heights. Each time, they promised it would be the last, but neither could resist the pull of their forbidden romance. As their emotional connection deepened, so did the risks they were willing to take. Close calls became more frequent, a lingering touch at a charity event, a heated glance across a crowded restaurant. The thrill of nearly being caught only added to the intensity of their affair. Little did they know their web of secrecy was about to unravel, setting in motion a series of events that would shake the foundations of Oak Ridge Heights and lead to consequences neither man could have foreseen. As Thaddeus and Luke's affair intensified, so did the complexity of their deceptions. Luke, once a man of routine, began crafting elaborate excuses for his absences and changes in schedule. Late nights at the office became more frequent, with Luke claiming he was working on a major development deal that required his constant attention. Weekend golf games stretched into all-day affairs, supposedly due to networking opportunities with potential clients. Thaddeus, for his part, juggled his growing client list with precision, always ensuring he had a plausible reason to be near Luke. He cultivated friendships with other Oak Ridge Heights residents, using their sessions as cover for his frequent presence in the neighborhood. He even went so far as to start a fitness class at the country club, providing a legitimate reason for his car to be parked there at odd hours. Their lies began to intertwine, creating a fragile house of cards. They coordinated their stories, memorizing details of fabricated events and imaginary people to maintain consistency. Luke spoke of a new junior partner named Xavier, who conveniently required extensive mentoring during evening hours. Thaddeus invented a high-maintenance client called Eloise, whose demands for last-minute sessions explained his sudden schedule changes. The stress of maintaining these falsehoods took its toll. Luke, once known for his sharp memory, found himself struggling to keep track of his own lies. He began keeping a coded journal, hidden in his office safe, to maintain the consistency of his stories. Thaddeus, ever meticulous, created a complex calendar system on his phone, with layers of fake appointments hiding the truth of his whereabouts. As months passed, their web of deceit grew ever more tangled. Each lie required another to support it, and soon both men found themselves living in a parallel reality of their own creation. The thrill of their secret rendezvous was increasingly tainted by the constant fear of discovery, yet neither could bring themselves to end the affair. While Thaddeus and Luke were entangled in their affair, Julia Ashworth was far from oblivious. At first, the changes in her husband were subtle. A new cologne, a sudden interest in fitness, longer hours at the office. She initially attributed these changes to a midlife renaissance, even feeling a spark of hope that it might rejuvenate their stagnant marriage. However, as weeks turned to months, Julia's instincts began to sound alarms. Luke's emotional distance, once a dull ache in their relationship, now felt like a chasm. His excuses for missed dinners and social engagements grew more elaborate and less convincing. She noticed him guarding his phone, angling the screen away when she entered a room. Julia's suspicions began to affect her daily life. She found herself analyzing every conversation, searching for inconsistencies in Luke's stories. Her normally impeccable focus during charity meetings wavered as her mind raced with possibilities. Was Luke having an affair? Was it with a colleague or perhaps a younger woman? The irony that Thaddeus, her own personal trainer, was at the center of her marital turmoil eluded her completely. In fact, Julia often confided in Thaddeus during their sessions, unaware that she was sharing her fears with the very man causing them. Thaddeus, in a display of psychological acrobatics, offered her comfort and advice, all while continuing his affair with her husband. As her suspicions grew, Julia began to withdraw from her social circles, fearful that she was the subject of local gossip. Her charity work, once a source of joy and purpose, became a performance where she struggled to maintain her composure. At home, the silence between her and Luke grew heavier, filled with unasked questions and unspoken accusations. Determined to uncover the truth, Julia decided to take matters into her own hands, setting in motion a series of events that would ultimately lead to a confrontation with devastating consequences. The fragile equilibrium of Thaddeus and Luke's secret affair was shattered. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, when Thaddeus received an anonymous text message. The contents were chilling. A clear photograph of him and Luke in an intimate embrace, taken through the window of their favorite hotel room. The message that followed was succinct. $50K or this goes public. You have 48 hours. Panic set in immediately. Thaddeus's carefully constructed world in Oak Ridge Heights teetered on the brink of collapse. His reputation, his business, everything he had worked for was at risk. But more than that, the threat extended to Luke. Exposure would mean the end of his marriage, potential professional ruin, and public humiliation. Thaddeus immediately contacted Luke, arranging an urgent meeting under the guise of an emergency training session. In the secluded corner of a 24-hour gym, Thaddeus showed Luke the threatening message. Luke's face drained of color as he realized the precariousness of their situation. The next 48 hours were a frenzy of activity, as they scrambled to gather the funds without raising suspicion. Luke, despite his wealth, found himself in a liquidity crunch due to ongoing real estate developments. He was forced to take out a high-interest loan, claiming it was for a time-sensitive business opportunity. Thaddeus liquidated his savings and maxed out his credit cards, telling his bank he was planning to open a new gym. As the deadline approached, the strain began to show. Luke became irritable and distracted, snapping at colleagues and avoiding Julia even more than usual. Thaddeus's typically flawless training sessions were marred by distraction and anxiety, leading to complaints from some of his high-profile clients. With just hours to spare, they managed to cobble together the required amount. Following the blackmailer's instructions, Thaddeus made the drop at a designated location, a nondescript locker at the Oak Ridge Heights bus terminal. As he walked away, having secured a promise that all evidence would be destroyed, Thaddeus felt a mix of relief and deepening dread. Who was behind this? Could they trust that it was truly over? The blackmail incident left both men shaken. What had once been an exhilarating secret was now a source of constant fear. Every unexpected phone call, every lingering glance from a stranger on the street became a potential threat. The passion that had fueled their affair was now tempered by paranoia. Moreover, the financial strain of the blackmail payment introduced new tensions. Luke, forced to explain the sudden loan to his business partners, found himself entangled in more lies. Thaddeus, his savings depleted, began to take on more clients and longer hours, leaving less time for their clandestine meetings. As they grappled with these new realities, neither man realized that their actions had not gone unnoticed. The withdrawn funds, the secretive meetings, the sudden changes in behavior, all of these had caught the attention of someone much closer to home. Julia Ashworth, her suspicions now a raging fire, had decided it was time to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Driven by a mixture of suspicion, hurt, and determination, Julia Ashworth embarked on a mission to uncover the truth behind her husband's increasingly erratic behavior. Her first step was to hire Rhonda Vesper, a discreet but highly effective private investigator recommended by a fellow socialite who had gone through a messy divorce. Rhonda began her investigation with meticulous precision. She set up surveillance on Luke, tracking his movements and photographing his encounters. Initially, the evidence seemed innocuous. Long hours at the office, business meetings at upscale restaurants, and frequent visits to the gym. However, as days turned into weeks, patterns began to emerge that didn't quite add up. Luke's supposed late-night meetings often coincided with times when Thaddeus's car was spotted in the vicinity. The gym visits extended far beyond reasonable workout times, with Luke and Thaddeus frequently leaving within minutes of each other. Rhonda's photographs captured lingering glances and seemingly casual touches that hinted at a deeper connection. As Rhonda dug deeper, she uncovered financial discrepancies that raised further red flags. The large unexplained loan Luke had taken out, coupled with numerous cash withdrawals from both men's accounts, pointed to some sort of shared secret or mutual blackmail. Julia, upon receiving Rhonda's detailed reports, felt her world crumbling around her. The possibility that Luke was having an affair was painful enough, but the realization that it might be with Thaddeus, a man she had trusted and confided in, was almost unbearable. Determined to gather irrefutable evidence, Julia took matters into her own hands. She installed a hidden camera in Luke's home office and placed a discreet tracking device on his car. She began to pay closer attention to Thaddeus during their training sessions, noting how he skillfully deflected questions about Luke's fitness progress. The final piece of evidence came on a Tuesday afternoon, when Julia, acting on a hunch, decided to surprise Luke at his office. As she approached his private conference room, she heard muffled voices. Peering through a crack in the door, she saw Luke and Thaddeus in an intimate embrace, their conversation a mix of endearments and worried whispers about someone who was watching them. In that moment, as her suspicions were confirmed in the most painful way possible, Julia felt a surge of emotions, betrayal, anger, and a steely resolve. She quietly retreated, her mind racing with plans for confrontation and retribution. The stage was set for a showdown that would change all of their lives forever. The day of reckoning arrived on a stormy Friday evening. Julia, armed with a folder full of evidence and a heart full of rage, waited for Luke in their expansive living room. She had sent the household staff away for the weekend, ensuring complete privacy for what she knew would be an explosive confrontation. When Luke walked through the door, shaking rain from his coat, he was met with an icy stare from his wife. Julia, her voice eerily calm, asked him to sit down. Confused and slightly alarmed by her demeanor, Luke complied, his mind racing to recall if he had forgotten an important date or event. Julia began by sliding the folder across the coffee table. As Luke opened it, his face drained of color. Inside were photographs, bank statements, and a detailed timeline of his affair with Thaddeus. Julia watched, her composure cracking, as Luke's expression cycled through shock, shame, and finally desperate denial. "Luke, you've been lying to me for months," Julia said, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion. Luke, realizing the futility of further deception, attempted to explain. He spoke of feeling trapped, of rediscovering himself, of the unexpected connection he had found with Thaddeus. His words, meant to clarify, only stoked the fires of Julia's anger. The argument escalated quickly. Years of unspoken resentments and frustrations poured out. Julia hurled accusations of betrayal and selfishness, while Luke countered with complaints of emotional distance and feeling unfulfilled. The elegant living room, usually a showcase of their perfect life, now echoed with harsh words and bitter recriminations. As the confrontation reached a fever pitch, the doorbell rang. Julia, her face flushed with anger, strode to answer it, expecting to find a concerned neighbor drawn by the shouting. Instead, she found Thaddeus on the doorstep, soaked from the rain and wearing an expression of confusion and alarm. Seizing his arm, Julia dragged Thaddeus into the house, forcing a three-way confrontation. Thaddeus, caught off guard, looked to Luke for guidance but found only panic in his lover's eyes. The atmosphere in the room shifted from anger to something more dangerous, a volatile mix of fear, jealousy, and desperation. Julia demanded answers from Thaddeus, her words laced with venom. She accused him of manipulating his way into their lives, of using his position as her trainer to seduce her husband. Thaddeus, his usual confidence shattered, attempted to defend himself, but his words seemed hollow in the face of Julia's fury. Luke, seeing Thaddeus under attack, felt a surge of protectiveness. He moved to stand between his wife and his lover, a gesture that only inflamed Julia's rage. In a moment of blind anger, she grabbed a heavy crystal vase from a nearby table and swung it at Luke. What happened next occurred in a matter of seconds, but would have repercussions that would last a lifetime. Luke, instinctively ducking, caused the vase to miss him and strike Thaddeus squarely on the temple. The impact was sickeningly loud in the sudden silence that followed. Thaddeus staggered, his eyes unfocused, before collapsing to the floor. Blood began to pool around his head, staining the expensive Persian rug a deep crimson. Julia and Luke stood frozen, the gravity of what had just occurred slowly sinking in. In that moment, as the storm raged outside and Thaddeus lay motionless on their living room floor, the lives of all three were irrevocably altered. The perfect facade of Oak Ridge Heights' golden couple had not just cracked, it had shattered completely, with consequences none of them could have foreseen. The moments following Thaddeus's collapse were a blur of panic and frantic activity. Luke, his legal training kicking in despite the shock, immediately called 911. Julia, her anger evaporating into horror, attempted to stem the bleeding with a nearby throw pillow, her trembling hands quickly becoming stained with Thaddeus's blood. Paramedics arrived within minutes, their sirens piercing the quiet suburban night. They worked efficiently, assessing Thaddeus's condition with grim expressions. Despite their best efforts, it was clear that the situation was dire. The blow to Thaddeus's temple had caused severe trauma, and he remained unresponsive as they prepared him for transport. As the ambulance sped away, its lights flashing in the rain-slicked streets, Luke and Julia were left to face the aftermath of their actions. The living room, once a showcase of their perfect life, now resembled a crime scene. Blood stained the expensive rug. The overturned furniture bore witness to their violent confrontation, and shards of the crystal vase glittered ominously in the dim light. At the hospital, a team of doctors fought to save Thaddeus's life. Hours passed in a haze of tense waiting and hushed conversations. Luke and Julia sat in separate corners of the waiting room, the weight of their shared secret and mutual recriminations keeping them apart, even in this moment of crisis. As dawn broke, a somber-faced doctor approached them. Despite all efforts, Thaddeus had succumbed to his injuries. The blunt force trauma to his head had caused irreparable brain damage, and he had slipped away in the early hours of the morning. The news hit Luke and Julia like a physical blow. In the span of a few hours, their lives had been upended in ways they could never have imagined. Their perfect world had not only been revealed as a facade, but had crumbled entirely, leaving a man dead in its wake. As they sat in stunned silence, the reality of their situation began to sink in. This was no longer just about an affair or a betrayed marriage. They were now at the center of a potential homicide investigation. The sound of approaching footsteps broke their reverie. Two police officers, their faces serious, were walking towards them. In that moment, as the first rays of sunlight streamed through the hospital windows, Luke and Julia Ashworth knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The golden couple of Oak Ridge Heights was about to face a reckoning that would shake their community to its core. The death of Thaddeus Bracey quickly became the focus of an intense police investigation. Detective Imogen Sloan, a veteran of the Oak Ridge Heights Police Department, was assigned to lead the case. Known for her sharp intellect and unwavering dedication, Detective Sloan approached the investigation with meticulous care. The Ashworth residence was cordoned off as a crime scene, with forensic teams combing through every inch of the property. The crystal vase, now a crucial piece of evidence, was carefully bagged and sent for analysis. Flood spatter patterns were studied, and every surface was dusted for fingerprints. Luke and Julia were subjected to hours of grueling interrogations. Their statements, initially given separately, were cross-referenced and scrutinized for inconsistencies. The couple's attempt to present a united front quickly crumbled under Detective Sloan's skilled questioning. As the investigation deepened, more details emerged. The financial transactions related to the blackmail came to light, adding another layer of complexity to the case. Thaddeus's past, including his military service and the mysterious incident that led to his discharge, became subjects of intense scrutiny. Detective Sloan also focused on the wider circle of Oak Ridge Heights society. Interviews with the Ashworths' friends, neighbors, and business associates painted a picture of a couple whose perfect image had been carefully cultivated but was far from reality. As weeks passed, the investigation began to point towards a charge of involuntary manslaughter. The evidence suggested that while Thaddeus's death was not premeditated, it was the direct result of Julia's actions during a heated confrontation. The stage was set for a trial that would captivate the nation and tear apart the fabric of Oak Ridge Heights high society. Julia's defense team, headed by the high-profile attorney Jameson Drake, argued that the death was a tragic accident, the result of a highly emotional confrontation rather than any intent to harm. They emphasized Julia's philanthropic work and standing in the community, portraying her as a victim of her husband's infidelity who had acted out of character in a moment of extreme distress. The trial lasted 4 weeks, captivating the nation with its mix of sex, betrayal, and suburban scandal. Luke's testimony proved particularly damaging as he struggled to reconcile his loyalty to Julia with the truth of his affair with Thaddeus. In the end, the jury found Julia guilty of involuntary manslaughter. The judge, taking into account her lack of prior criminal history and the circumstances of the case, sentenced her to 5 years in prison, a decision that sparked debate about privilege and justice in America. Luke, while not criminally charged, faced civil lawsuits from Thaddeus's family and the collapse of his business empire as clients distanced themselves from the scandal. As Julia was led away to begin her sentence, the once golden couple of Oak Ridge Heights had been reduced to cautionary tales, their fall from grace complete and irreversible.